could go ahead and give it a start. So I guess call the workshop meeting to order, Mr. Stone. All right, when we all rise for a pledge to the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Only this one's for some.
All right, so tonight's workshop meeting is basically to review the responsibilities of the planning board, also to give some insight to the new members of where all the laws and regulations come from and what our duties are to review and approve site plans and subdivisions. So, with that, our first item's a simple overview of the planning board. So who's gonna step up and give a...
Sure. First of all, I'd like to welcome all the new members and thank them for their service to the town. It's an important, this is an important duty, you know, it's for the benefit of all the residents of the town, the applicants as well as, you know, the residents, because the board, the planning board, you know, does a very, very important function for the town. One of the things that I'd like to just start out with is kind of the framework of how land use or zoning laws fit into the grand scheme of things in New York State. The New York State Constitution gives local governments the power to create laws to regulate its property and affairs of government. That's called, you may have heard the term municipal home rule. So basically, the New York State Constitution gives local governments the power to regulate their own affairs, and that supersedes the powers of the legislature in some areas, particularly with respect to zoning, for the most part. So one of the restrictions with respect to the municipal home rule law is it's a very legal term, and it says that any laws that are adopted must not be inconsistent with general laws of New York State. I'm not going to go into that too much, but what that says is that a local government has the ability to what we call supersede state laws that have specific rather than general application. Particularly with respect to zoning and planning, so the authority to the local government from the legislature for zoning, in addition to the Constitution, is found for a town in Article 16 of the town law. And the particular section is Town Law 261, which authorizes a town to create zoning regulations for for the town outside of any incorporated villages. So one of the things that the town of Wappinger has a village within its bounds, the village of Wappingers Falls. Part of the village of Wappingers Falls is also in the town of Poughkeepsie. So any of the zoning laws adopted by the town of Wappinger do not apply in the village of Wappingers Falls. So if any of you see on your tax bill, you'll see town outside of village charges. That's what that's what we're talking about. So the zoning laws, when you're reading any of the zoning laws in the town, you will frequently see any area of the town outside of the village. So one of the important things is that the village has its own legal authority to adopt zoning within the village. They have their own planning board, they have their own zoning board of appeals, and they have the board of trustees in the village. In the town, you have the town board, and then planning board, and the zoning board of appeals, separate and apart from the village. So the authority for the planning board comes from Town Law 271, and it gives the town board, it gives the municipality the authority to appoint a planning board and to review subdivision plats, site plans, or whatever else the laws of the town delegate to that planning board from the authority under Town Law 16, Town Law Article 16. With respect to, so the authority that the town of Wappinger is granted to the planning board for land use regulations is subdivision approval, site plan approval, the issuance of special permits in some cases, in most cases, frankly. There's some special permits that are issued by the town board. And you also regulate new construction with respect to wetlands. And then also a fairly, I won't say fairly recent, but one of the other functions that also comes in now, and this is a creature of federal law, the Clean Water Act requires municipalities to regulate stormwater discharge. That's, sometimes you'll hear it referred, that's the SWIP that gets reviewed. And the way our code is drafted, if there is a SWIP associated with a project that comes before the planning board, that is reviewed and approved as part of the planning board process. With respect to the zoning laws, a town is not required to adopt zoning laws. There's quite some municipalities, smaller municipalities upstate that don't have any zoning laws. Frankly, in the history of the town of Wappinger had a planning board before it had zoning. The authority of the planning board at that time was just to approve subdivision plats. So with respect to the authority for the planning board, you know, a town doesn't have to have a planning board, but we do, and it doesn't have to have zoning. If a town does adopt zoning, it must have a zoning board of appeals, which gives authority to vary the conditions of the zoning. And with respect to the planning board, again, because if there is zoning, a town does not have to have planning board, but I'm not aware of any municipalities, at least in the Hudson Valley area, that has zoning but no planning board. And so with respect to some of the other authority for the planning board acts as an advisory board to the town board in with respect to zoning amendments. One of the things that the New York State town law requires is that if the town board is going to make any changes to the zoning law, it has to make a referral to the planning board to make its recommendations with respect to any laws that it may adopt. And that is also in our code. One of the other things that, so part of the other authority for the planning board, a planning board may employ consultants and staff, the people sitting at this table, and be as the secretary. And that's a valid town charge that's paid for by the town board puts that in their budget. The criteria of who can be on the planning board, you must be a resident of the town, you must be a citizen of the United States, technically, I believe the terminology is qualified elector. And then you cannot, the only people who cannot statutorily sit on a planning board is a member of the town board. So you can't be a member of the town board and a member of a planning board, the planning board here. A member of the planning board, as Barbara had actually just said, you can, a member of the town board can be, a town planning board can be a member of the county planning board or county planning commission. So that is permitted. One of the other things in adopting zoning, one of the things that is required under New York law is that any zoning that has to be adopted must be in conjunction with a comprehensive plan. The town adopted a comprehensive plan in 2010. The comprehensive plan was probably begun to look at around 2004, so it was in quite a while. 2004 to 2006 is when it first started, and it took quite a while to go through the process. One of the things that the statute requires is that if there are amendments to the comprehensive plan, the planning board weighs in on that as an advisory body to whatever entity is doing the comprehensive plan. One of the other things, that's a document that the town has. A lot has changed since 2010. I know there's been a lot of requests to make amendments and updates to the comprehensive plan. And whether a new comprehensive plan is adopted is a decision made by the town board, and ultimately the town board would adopt any comprehensive plan that would be created. But again, the zoning that's adopted must be consistent with the comprehensive plan. One of the other things is with respect to a comprehensive plan, just because something's in a comprehensive plan doesn't necessarily mean it gets adopted as a matter of law. So one of the things here as the planning board sits, the planning board's obligation is to implement the zoning law as it is adopted. There's quite a number of things that were suggested in the comprehensive plan which were never approved by the town board. So there were recommendations that were made to make certain changes in the zoning laws, which were never implemented. So one of the things that the board, I always caution boards, is that the comprehensive plan is generally guidelines, but the obligation is to follow the law as drafted, because frequently municipalities, for whatever reasons, do not adopt the recommendations in the comp plan. And if the recommendations in the comp plan are not adopted, they're technically not binding, because a subdivision application or a site plan or a special permit is reviewed against the law that is currently in existence, not the recommendation of the comp plan. And that issue comes up from time to time. Now, one of the other things that appears in Article 16 is the idea of an official map of the town. We do not have an official map, but we have maps that, and an official map basically would show streets, parks, other infrastructure could be included on it. And one of the things that, particularly with respect to the new MS4 regulations that are coming out, that were just became effective at the beginning of this year, is New York State is going to start requiring municipalities to start mapping all of their drainage structures. That's one of the things that could be included in an official map. one of the things with respect to the subdivision regulations, where the planning board approves a subdivision plat that shows streets on it and drainage structures or parkland, if there wasn't an official map, the approval, one of the things that the approval of the plat by the planning board would authorize a change to the official map to include whatever, new streets or parks that are approved as part of the subdivision plat. So, and that's one of the other kind of things that, with respect to the planning board, from the idea of a town, a map, one of the obligations of the planning board is, in essence, to look behind, or beyond, I should say, the application that's before it, particularly with respect to subdivisions, not so much with respect to site plans. Because site plans really just focus on one particular lot, whereas a subdivision creates multiple lots. And one of the things that the planning board should be doing is seeing how the proposed subdivision fits within the greater framework. One of the things that is an obligation under the statutes is that the infrastructure that's being built out with respect to that particular, the proposed subdivision, should be consistent with any kind of official plans that have been adopted by the town or by the county. So, under the statutes, the town has, the ability to adopt a plan regarding water and sewer infrastructure, and with respect to, the county has similar provisions. So one of the things that the planning board should be doing is, as part of reviewing subdivisions, is to look at how does the proposed street grid, street layout on the subdivision plat, how does that fit with the existing street layout? One of the things that, the town is a lot more built out than it used to be, but, some of the subdivisions that were approved in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, when you had a lot of vacant land in the town, one of the things that, and again, you still have this obligation, is if you've got a large vacant piece behind or next to a property, when you're looking at the subdivision application, one of the things that the planning board should be looking at is, potential future connections to that vacant land, which brings up one of the other things with respect to subdivision applications or site plan or any of the duties of the planning board, is that you also have an obligation to look at if the application deals with property near an agricultural district or in an agricultural district. Statutorily, the planning board has an obligation to look at how that application affects the agricultural district and that property as on that property and also on adjacent properties. So, we've got some ag districts primarily in the eastern part of the town, but, and we don't get a whole lot, we get some of them, but we, from time to time, we've got applications for agricultural properties. So, that's something also that the planning board has to take into account.
Hold our questions to
Sure.
the end?
Anytime, and if anybody wants that question,
Yeah,
it's
I-
easier for me because I have short-term memory loss,
I have a few-
so I can answer them.
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
I'm better to respond as they come up.
This goes back to the beginning, because I came here thinking, well,
Sure.
okay, so how does the plan do, how does the town planning board, what's its relationship to planning in the town?
I'll slide the microphone over.
And how that gets done. And I think related to that, you said the planning board is advisory to the town board with respect to zoning amendments.
Yes,
And there's a referral process.
correct.
And the town board seeks advisory comment on that?
Yes.
is that through a vote by the planning board, or is it?
Yes, it is. It is.
Is there a
So,
time frame attached to that?
it's 45 day, I believe so the referral from under our, well, let me take a step back just regarding the town of Wappinger local laws. So, the town of Wappinger has adopted local laws regarding zoning. One of the other things if you read some of the cases or whatever, prior to the 1960s and before, the towns adopted zoning ordinances. So if you're reading some of the old materials, you may see what's called an ordinance, references to ordinances. But since the adoption of the municipal home rule law in the 70s, the town of Wappinger and most other municipalities have adopted local laws. It's a legal difference, but a local law gets filed up in Albany, and it has a little bit more weight than an ordinance. So there's, it's actually easier to adopt a local law than it is to adopt an ordinance, because under the old laws, you had to publish an ordinance in its entirety in a paper before it became effective, whereas on a local law, you just file it in Albany. But, so under our local law process, so our code is now codified as a local law. Subdivision is under Chapter 217 of our town code, and zoning is under Chapter 240. The subdivision, and both provisions have, Chapter 217 and Chapter 240, both have amendment provisions which require a referral to the planning board, which provides the planning board 45 days to respond as to whether it views the amendment as being favorable or unfavorable.
It's an advisory opinion, correct?
Correct, and there's no, I do not believe, I'd have to go back and look, I don't believe our code requires a supermajority vote for the town board to overturn the advisory opinion of the planning board. One of the other things along those lines is so there's what's called referral to county planning. Sometimes the shorthand is 239M referral. So under Chapter 239M of the general municipal law, certain things that affect county properties or state properties must be referred to the Dutchess County Planning Department, and they will then come back and make a recommendation within 30 days. And should the planning board or town board or zoning board of appeals wish to override that recommendation, adopt something that's not consistent with the recommendation, they must do so by a supermajority vote.
So just, and I apologize to the former board member
No.
who, probably know all this stuff, but if a stakeholder, whether it's an applicant or a community is seeking a zoning change, the first stop is the town board,
Yes.
and then the evaluation in terms of whether it's consistent with a comprehensive plan.
Correct.
If it's not, can the town board propose a change to the comprehensive?
It certainly can. So it can do either, it has the option to amend the comprehensive plan, rewrite the comprehensive
Yeah,
plan.
yeah.
So yes, and so if you're going to propose a zoning change that's not consistent with the comp plan, the best practice is to make those two, make the zoning change and the amendment to the comp plan in tandem. So there's nothing that prevents them from being processed simultaneously.
And that gets referred to the planning board for advisory
Yes.
opinion?
Yep. So yes, and it would also get referred to, in most cases, to Dutchess County Planning as well. And then we'll talk about it a little later, but in all likelihood, it would also require a seeker review So under the seeker review, there may be other agencies that also would participate in the process. Whether, when we talk about seeker, there's two types of agencies. There's an involved agency, being an agency that must grant an approval for a particular action. And then there's interested agencies, which may have some interest in the application. Typically, with a zoning amendment, there's no other entity than the town board. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that requires an outside agency for approval. But one of the things that could practice would be if it may have an impact on traffic on a county road or a state road, you would refer it to New York State DOT or Dutchess County DPW. If it may affect water and sewer, you would refer it to Dutchess County Health Department.
Yeah, I assume the town, or the staff can also propose zoning changes to the town board?
Yes,
Changes
and you know, the planning board can as well. I mean, that's one of the things that, and the zoning board, you know, I think that, you know, we've done it, the planning board has done it in the past, has sent letters to the town board saying, you know, we've had difficulties, you know, with respect to a particular aspect of the zoning law, the subdivision law, and we'd request these changes, so.
All right, well, I don't want to take up too much
Yep.
of everybody's time.
No, those are good questions, Tim.
But, yeah, so, but, you know, right now, there's one local law that's proposed for adoption. It's regarding propane storage facilities. So the seeker review, that's the Downey Energy Project, and that's currently pending. So Downey came in as an applicant and had, you know, requested a change to permit propane storage as a permitted use within the town. And, you know, a local law was drafted and introduced before the town board. It was referred to the planning board, and then the planning board was designated as lead agency under seeker because from a coordinated review process, and this is not uncommon with, you know, applicant-induced zoning changes where you would have a change proposed to the law, to the zoning law, as well as an application for site plan approval or subdivision before the planning board.
A lot of stuff
Thank
like
you.
that is like nuts and bolts too, because there was one that came in front of us from the town board, and they were looking to change a law about parking commercial vehicles at your houses and stuff. And I remember the wording in it was like up to 9,000 pound vehicle, where some regular pickup trucks are 9,800 pounds. And it's just like the little stuff like that that we might catch.
Yeah.
And we had it moved up to like 10,000 pounds.
Got it.
Otherwise, some people wouldn't be able to park their pickup truck in the driveway.
These days, yeah.
Yeah, but nobody really caught it until it got us, but.
So, so anyway, with respect to, so the planning board, actually, you know, in some municipalities, the planning board sometimes is tasked to take a larger role. I mean, in other municipalities, I've seen where planning boards have been requested to look at an inventory of the parks in the town and, you know, make recommendations as to, you know, what improvements may need to be made, or, you know, some municipalities, you know, I've looked at road layouts and asked where, you know, future changes to an official map, you know, where does the planning board think, you know, traffic, you know, a new road would be better to assist in traffic circulation through the town. So, you know, the planning board, you know, can, if the town board requests, you know, provide some valuable, you know, information. And one of the things that is good, you know, frankly, in my experience, I've been, you know, a municipal attorney since I'm going on 25 years. And in my experience, the planning boards know more about the zoning law than the town board does. And so, you know, it's, it really does make a lot of sense for the planning board to weigh in with respect to the laws, you know, and, you know, sometimes I don't think they necessarily, town boards don't, and again, that's not just this town, across the board. I don't think rely on the experience of the planning board as much as they should, because, you know, if you've been on the board for a while, you know, as the longstanding members, and you get to know each parcel, and you know, you drive around the town, and I know that piece, and I've approved that, and I've, you know, so you know where the problems are and everything else. So it's definitely a valuable resource for the town board. Let me just talk to one thing about what the planning board does not do. And I'll finish up with this, and then we can go on to the next point about seeker. The planning board does not make a determination as to what is or is not a permitted use under zoning. So when an application comes in, the first person who it goes to is the zoning administrator, which is Barbara Roberti, and one of the things that someone will look at the application and make a determination if the proposed use is permitted in the zone. So if the proposed use is permitted in the zone, it then can go forward before the planning board. If the zoning administrator makes a determination that the use is not permitted in the zone, the applicant has two choices. The applicant can either appeal the determination of the zoning administrator to the Board of Zoning, the Zoning Board of Appeals. That's the reason why it's called the Board of Appeals. That board can appeal the decision of the zoning administrator. The other option is they can apply for a use variance, which also goes to the Zoning Board of Appeals. And what a use variance does is it permits a use that is not otherwise permitted in the zone to occur. It's a very difficult standard to achieve, because a use variance means that in order to grant in order for the ZBA to grant a use variance, there must be a finding that there's no other viable use for the property that could make a reasonable rate of return, you know, based on the zoning characteristics in that district.
Couldn't they also go to the, as what we talked about, to the town board?
Yes, and they
See
can
the
request,
zoning change.
which is what happened in the Downing case. They went and actually asked the town board to add that as a permitted use. So that's another option as well. And then we'll just touch on it briefly since I raised the ZBA. The other thing that a ZBA does is they grant variances to what are called area variances. So area variances deal with basically provision, so the use is permitted in the zone, but there may be things that they cannot meet in the zoning code. Setbacks, lot size, density of development on the project, height of proposed buildings, those things. So those are the typical area variances that go to the ZBA, and the review process for an area variance is much simpler than it is for a use variance.
And on those, there's no referral to the planning board, is that correct? Because those
Well-
are
So, can I
findings?
interrupt?
That's-
Sure.
So Tuesday night, I gave an overview of area variances with the zoning board. I didn't touch too much on use variances, they're very rare. In the 23 years I'm here, they've only granted 4. So to spend too much time, we have an attorney present because it is a much deeper dive. But the one thing that I think all the board should know is, what is their relationship with another board? And I have a lot from the state, the same way I gave you, for them. And it says that you should be giving a recommendation, some sort of acknowledgement that you're sending a project to the ZBA. So what I've heard from them over the years is that you're sitting here and you're looking at secret and wetlands and just everything. And then you send it to them for a parking waiver. But they don't have all the nuts and bolts, they have no idea everything you looked at. So they're kind of only met with whatever that engineer architect comes, and of course, you know they're gonna sell it well. But the board a lot of times feels, is this really good? So I think they would really enjoy and appreciate you giving them some direction. The other thing that came out of Tuesday is they said, could the planning board, or a few members, come if we ask them, if we were unsure of a project? So say Tractor Supply, when that came, that had a lot of public outcry. It was on a property with steep slopes in the back. They didn't have enough room for enough parking. They did require a few variances. So it probably would have behooved them to feel comfortable, not with a consultant, but with one or two of you who have spent the time sitting here listening to this, to come and speak to it. And that's a request that was made Tuesday. So not every project, but one that are more difficult than others. But definitely some sort of a letter, not necessarily saying, I love it, approve it, or we hate it, don't give it to them, but something to give them some direction that you can see where you guys are looking at this. So I think going forward, that should be done. And 20 years ago it was done, and there was the zoning board, certain members didn't like the planning board kind of directing them, and it was just stopped. But I think it would be a good tool for the zoning board, and I think it would be good for you as a board who are actually giving the approval on a project to help them make some decisions.
That'd be something we just introduce into the minutes, or have B draft a little letter for them, or
Well,
what?
you would say to B, you would maybe somebody make a motion to send a letter to the zoning board of appeals, and this is what you wanted to say.
Okay.
And then at the zoning board of appeals, the first meeting is a discussion. If they felt they wanted some input, then I could come back to you, you meet opposite weeks, and ask if one or two of you could please come to the planning board and give the way you see it, not just the applicant's profession.
That's cool.
Yeah, and that's, legally, that's totally permitted.
Yeah, but we've done that. We've given them letters. I mean,
Right.
Right.
I've gone to their meetings for certain things. The Alpine thing was the last one, that we had, because I guess, there was actually, I had talked to, one of the members of the board that didn't understand it, so.
And so when they give a decision on something as big as Alpine, I think it helps them make a decision to get a take from this board,
Yeah.
because they're not, on Alpine actually,
Versed.
they did hear the whole thing, but it really, on a lot of projects that are primarily just here, it will help them make a decision that it's not just the parking. It involves more. So going forward, yes, the letters are good, but
And what would be the fine line of that, like where it's the do's and don'ts? As you said, it's permitted. What would be like the fine line where there's a question of not going to the zoning?
There really isn't.
Okay. Yeah.
So, it's up to now, obviously, one of the things that's important, frankly, is making a good record for anything. So with respect to referrals to the zoning board, it's better that if there's a variance before the zoning board of appeals, there should be some record in the minutes that the zoning board, that there's an application pending, contemporaneously, there's an application for the variance on a project that's before the planning board. And the planning board is requested to make a recommendation. Obviously, the recommendation is not binding upon the zoning board of appeals. The zoning board of appeals has its own standard of how to reach a decision, but clearly it has, you have the ability to put your record or your advice on the record with respect to the application. One of the things with respect to variance is that is how does it affect the community? And does it affect, adjacent properties? Does it have any impact on how the town would operated zoning laws in on other applications. And, frankly, the zoning board in the town of Wappinger, not unlike many of the other municipalities around here, deal with variances for single-family residences, for, putting in a deck, putting in a pool, putting on an addition on a building. None of those applications ever come before the planning board. But if you're looking at a parking variance, a substantial parking variance for a shopping center, that's something that the planning board should actually weigh in on. One of the things that that happens in our code is the planning board has the ability to waive by our code certain of the provisions, particularly with respect to parking. But sometimes the planning board will say, that's a pretty big variance. That's a pretty big waiver that would be granted. So we're not necessarily comfortable with that. And then the applicant has the ability to go to the ZBA. But again, that's really a function of due process. So then you're going to be in a, and that's a typical situation where, the planning board had a request for a waiver of 20 parking spaces, where, 100 is required. The applicant says, I still need this, and then they're going to go to the if you've denied the waiver, they go to the ZBA, which they have the legal right to do. And the planning board then certainly has the right, if not the obligation, to go to the ZBA and say, hey, look, we looked at this and we thought that was not, we don't think that's good planning. So we would request that you deny the variance. All of that is appropriate, it's not over the line. And again, it's, the zoning board, they may then take that into consideration in writing its decision. It may deny it or it may grant it. Sure.
So I know you said earlier that obviously not all of the stuff we see, a lot of it goes right to the ZBA. If there's something that's at the ZBA that we haven't seen, could we still, are we allowed to still go and make a recommendation?
Yeah, anybody?
Yes.
Typically, I would say it is unusual that would be true, that something would go to the ZBA before coming before the planning board. It's not impossible. It happened very recently.
And that's why I asked, because
Yeah.
I know Alpine was a
It was-
substantial project, and I didn't.
It was
think
irregular.
That should, right, and Alpine should have came before the planning board.
Yes.
Before it went to the zoning board, because again, the zoning board's decision, they ask for a variance, they're supposed to act on what they're asking for. If there was, let's say, they wanted to change the numbers, or do anything else, that should all take place in front of us, and that should be done before, they even go to the ZBA, to kind of see and massage the project to make it, to make it more appealing to the, to the board, and the public, make it kind of fit, instead of them just saying, we want to cram as much as we can in on a piece of property. If we say, listen, maybe you should really rethink this a little bit, and then that might give them the ability, instead of going to the ZBA, and then, they're saying, well, no, this is far too large, for where you're looking to do this, and maybe, that's where they ended up with it. They couldn't make that decision there, so.
So if somebody could go to the ZBA before they come to you for a use variance, and I think you just approved it, but 33 Middle Bush, right up the street, is a block building that's been here decades and decades.
Yeah.
All right, so it was there all the time. So it's been empty for a long time. So they came to the ZBA to get a use variance. They had to show they couldn't make a financial return on their investment with a house, and they did that. But I believe they also sent it here because when they got done, they would need a site plan.
Yeah.
So it behooves them, before they give a use variance, if it's something that's gonna come to you, you should be able to weigh in ahead of time before they grant it. That's why use variances are so difficult. And there are times, not so much the ZBA, but your board can refer things to the town board. The town board, as Jim's already said, if there's a zone change or a text amendment or a rezone, it comes to you for your opinion. boards do interact with different things.
And then one of the other things, to that point, there's some provisions in our code that permit an applicant to come in for what's called conceptual review, be it a subdivision application or a site plan application or special use permit, where, and this is fairly common, where before a developer or a property owner wants to spend a lot of money on a project, they will come in with a conceptual plan and present it to the board and say, what do you think?
We just have one of those,
Yeah, we
Just-
just had two, actually, yeah.
Another one on the 5th.
Right, so that's a very, and again, that's an advisory opinion, there's no formal application in, but, that's one of the other things, and, you'll look at, the provisions of the code, and basically, the task of the planning board is to look at the zoning code, and the subdivision code, and basically check off the boxes and make sure that the application that's come before you meets the legal requirements. This is not, you're not drafting laws, you're not deciding appeals, you're not making interpretations. Basically, what you're doing is you're looking at a particular application and saying, does this meet our law? And, so that's, as a general rule, what you're doing. And to that point, the last couple of things I just want to talk about is that with respect to the items that come before the planning board, you're not looking at the actual construction of the building. That's something that the building department looks at. The building department is going to determine, whether it complies with the New York State Uniform Code, which sets the fire code, building code, plumbing code, electrical code. That's something that the building inspectors do. It's, sometimes you'll look at issues particularly with respect to the fire code, because one of the things that comes up in the fire code is access to the building for firefighting equipment, fire lanes.
Turning template.
Right, what kind of equipment is there, driveway widths, those are all things that affect the site itself, hence the name site plan. But you'll also look at that in subdivision regulations. But again, most of that, so all of the nitty-gritty of elevators in the building and, things like that, those are all, are the windows big enough? Now, again, some of that comes into the play with architectural review, but, and each time the New York State changes the uniform code, they add more and more requirements that people have to do. So now there's, energy efficient requirements that, buildings have to meet. So that's one of the things that the planning board doesn't do. The planning board is not looking at the nitty-gritty of the building plan, because basically the application that's, for the most part, coming before the planning board, at least on new construction, is kind of a black box, if you will, where, you can certainly look at elevations of the building and how it looks, but, nobody's going to be looking at, are there enough columns to support the second floor, or, things of that nature, which is.
Thank God.
And to that end, a lot of times, we look at the last plan that you approved. So when they come in with the building plans, the outside has to meet what you approved, but the inside, when we look at the revision dates, and sometimes it takes months, they were still revising how it was going to be built right up to when they delivered it. So they probably don't want to spend a lot of money until they have your approval on the building before they finish on the interior.
Something that I would add is that, as Jim said, the town board writes the rules. Our job here is to make sure that they're playing by the rules, and the ZBA is there to sort of provide relief from the rules. But there are a lot of instances in the code which ask you as a board to use your judgment in good design and good planning. Waivers are an example of that, architectural review, things that come up a lot where that's going to be the case is parking, lighting design, signage, the design of subdivisions. So, there is a certain amount of yes, they're playing by the rules, they get to do what they get to do, that's by right, but there is a lot of your judgment on what is good planning and what is good design.
So the chain of command is kind of like the town board and us.
Well, so the town board is going to write the rules, but in those rules, there are a lot of places where it spells out, this is a place where the planning board needs to use their best judgment on what makes the most sense.
And a lot of that is because, when an application comes before you, one size doesn't fit all, obviously. So, the application for the Cube Smart Outdoor Storage, where you had, lighting outside a building for, RV storage. So you had very large vehicles where you really couldn't put, the standard height poles. And there's flexibility built into the code with respect to that. One of the things we have in our code regarding parking, we have a provision where we can, what's called land bank parking. So, what is it, 20% or 10%? What's the max we can bank?
I think it's higher than that. I can double check. I think it's
So,
higher than that.
so for argument's sake, let's say it's 20%. So if you have 100 spaces, that's required. And one of the things that the zoning code says is, if I've got a building of 100 square feet, again, these numbers are going to be all totally wrong, but if I have a building that's 10,000 square feet, and it is a retail store, it needs 100 parking spaces. That's not what it is, but those are just good numbers. You may have the ability to, the applicant has the ability to propose land banked parking, meaning you can put out the space for 100 parking spots, but you only have to put blacktop down for 80. And should, in the future, they actually use all the 80 consistently, there's provisions in our code that says they then have to build it out. And again, it's less costly for them to build out the additional parking, but it's also good planning. You don't have what's called the impervious surface. You don't have the blacktop where the water, runs off and creates drainage issues and it has to go to stormwater and all of that. So, the less development on a parcel, typically the better. So that's one of the things where, you've got that ability.
It's 50%.
50.
It's up to half of it.
Wow.
There's also a provision in the same section of the code, right? There are a lot of uses in the code that say this use needs a certain number of parking spaces per square foot or per seat or things like that. But in the same section, it'll say if, for whatever reason, they present to the board that they think that that number is way off, and they're going to provide good math that can be checked to demonstrate that, or if their use is not on the list, we don't have anything specifically spelled out, it's up to the planning board to determine what the total number of parking spaces should be and how many of those can be land banked.
So for an example that you could look at, Tractor Supply came in, and their business model said that for this square footage, we never have every spot taken, and we, whatever the math was at the time, we only need 70 spaces. I'm making it the number. Well, they've helped, land banked what the code said. And to this day, I have never gone by Tractor Supply and seen a full lot. Not
Never.
even Christmas. So they know what their business model is. It's not that kind of business like a supermarket that every spot is taken.
Yeah.
So they save a lot of land from becoming impervious surface. So that works. And yet there's a caveat that if they leave and you get something like a supermarket there are places that they can get spaces back for a business more robust that would have more people. So that's a good
Yeah.
example.
It honestly, it does come up a lot because a lot of the parking requirements in our code are very old. At that time, people were driving more and shopping online a lot less. But they were also sort of planning for the busiest day of the year as opposed to planning for your average day, right? It's a grocery store the day before Christmas as opposed to a normal day at the grocery store. And that's what all of those numbers were designed for. And all of those numbers have gone down since they were added to the code, as far as sort of international standards go. So it is a request that comes up quite a bit, and it's not.
So we just got to look at it as if they do the right thing, there's enough land to
To build them if we need to.
to build it if you
Yeah.
need to, because if they sell down the line and other businesses come in, you know,
That need that parking, exactly.
that need that parking, it's not just like, oh, okay, well, you know.
It's already by law, but, you know, by signing the site plan, it's there.
Mhm.
So they don't have to come back and reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
Come in and get a building permit or whatever, depending on what they have to do, or even to actually put those spaces in play, because you
Yeah.
already approved them.
It's a win-win too. I mean, they don't have to put up the cash for it. We don't all, as a community, have to look at big empty parking lots that are, you know, being used for kids doing donuts or, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever empty parking lots get used for.
The Duchess Mall.
Yeah.
There you go.
BJ's,
Yeah.
So the last thing I just want to touch on in this section is septic systems and wells. Those are in the jurisdiction of Dutchess County Department of Health. You know, it's kind of a synergistic relationship because where the improvements are on the particular lots will govern, or usually it's the other way around. Usually most lots, at least in a residential subdivision or in a commercial subdivision where you don't have municipal sewer, the location of the septic field is probably the driver for the design of the lot. The regulations as to where that go are from the Dutchess County Sanitary Code of the New York State Health Code, New York State Sanitary
At
Code.
75.
Right. So they basically have the first call as to where the septic's going to be. And then based on that, you know, once that is kind of finalized, because one of the things they do is perk testing and, you know, are the soils suitable for putting a septic on the lot and things of that sort. So you know, so that approval is granted by the health department, and then also with respect to the wells, you know, there's distances between neighboring wells, neighboring septic, water bodies, and again, all of those are regulated by the health department. So as the application is going through the process at the planning board, they are also having, the health department is reviewing that application as well, you know, as to, you know, the location of the well and septic. So, and before a final approval is issued for a subdivision plat, before the planning board can finally approve the plat, legally it must be approved by the health department before the chairman can sign the plat for it to be filed with the county. With that, I think that's just kind of the general overview of interactions between the board and kind of the framework of how it works. Does anybody have any question? The next thing we're going to talk about is seeker.
Those are all those little letters you get on your email. You'll see approvals from fire, from county health, from this one, that one, those are all the approvals for all these projects. You kind of got to put them all together and make sense of them.
I have a question on
Sure.
the chronology of the last item you were just talking about. So if the planning board approves a subdivision subject to the approval of the health department for septic and well, and the chairman won't sign it until that happens, it goes to the health department. Suppose they make some modification and say, this lot is not going to be able to exist because there's no way you can get a well and a septic on that lot. What happens then?
Then they have to come back to the planning board and get it changed before the chairman can sign. So one of the things that, just so from a kind of nuts and bolts provision, usually what happens is the property owner or developer will be doing preliminary tests before the application comes in. So what they'll do is they'll identify soils on the property. If there's a septic, you know, a septic field, they're going to investigate whether or not they can get a septic field on the property, at least if they're smart. Because, you know, doing a design before and then going to the health department afterwards really creates a lot of risk. So most developers will go to the health department first. You know, frequently if you drive around, you'll see a sign that says Lot B, Board of Health approved. If it's a big lot that wasn't part of a subdivision, that's one of the things that, they may have gone out and looked at.
They've done a perk test and basically they've
The
approved.
drainage is gonna
Yeah.
be suitable for, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's,
They have to do that with the lot count.
And if they do that with a lot count, when they do the perk test, is that at each individual plot or is that a general?
it's going to be, well, it depends on what the final configuration was, but if every lot is going to have its own septic, then they have to have a perk test for each lot,
For each lot?
generally.
Deep
Um,
tests and perk tests.
Yep.
For each lot.
So, yeah, so that's, but again, and, the other thing is, a lot of we were gonna put it, I was gonna discuss it at the end, but to the point of conditions. So one of the things is, when the application comes through, there's the approval, be it a subdivision or a site plan. We have what's called conditional approval, or final approval. So it is extremely rare that the planning board issues a final approval at the end of the process, because usually there's conditions that have to be met before they can go to the building department, health department approval. If there's a driveway permit that's required from county or county DPW or New York State, that's a condition of approval, and they can't get the plat signed until they get a final approval from them. And it's the chicken and the egg, right? Because a lot of times what will happen is county DPW will not give you a permit until the planning board has approved. And you can't get final approval from the planning board until you get approval from the county DPW. So the way it works is, so in order to get that loghead fixed, is the planning board grants a conditional approval and notes that as a condition of approval. So once all those conditions are met, then the site plan or plat gets signed. In the case of a subdivision plat, it then can be filed in the Dutchess County Clerk's office. And in the case of a site plan, a building permit then can be issued for the project. So, but that's one of the things, the conditions, and if Dutchess County DPW says, no, the driveway has to be moved, and they won't issue the permit, then the applicant has to come back and change the driveway location. I mean, we had that over on Myers Corners years ago. So it happens, but one of the things during the process is there's coordination with those agencies. They get copies of the plans as an iteration, and the applicant is required to go and consult with those agencies to make sure that the changes to the plan that this board has recommended meet their criteria as well. The other agency that the board deals with frequently is New York State Department of Environmental Conservation for wetlands, or if there's streams or bats or different things like that. So habitat for endangered species, and then also fortunately we don't have a lot of them that come before us, but also what's called SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office. So sometimes if you've got cultural resources of significance, you may have to get the applicant will have to get approval from SHPO if there's a landmark, something that has landmark status, or there's historic district, or there may be archaeological sensitive sites. So
is there a list of agencies that we should be aware of as a board, like the top?
I'm looking it up here. So somebody comes in with an application and they give it to Bing. I look at it, as Jim had said, to make sure it meets the zoning to a point. There are always changes. So before you even see that project, a lot's going on. I think it's 18 or 19 copies generally. So you will get, when you get a buck out sheet, or once you get the first plan, the cover sheet is going to say that it went to this board, these consultants, it went to you. It always goes to Dutchess County Planning, Dutchess County Health. We have to check. Now, if it's a town road, it's gonna go to our highway superintendent. If it's a state road or a county road, it would go to those agencies. It may go to the the New York State DEC if there's wetlands on the property. If it's within 500 feet of another municipality, it has to go to that municipality and let them know. So that list, when you see there, you will
Those are the
see,
important.
and it will be checked off, so you will know they are all getting a copy technically at the same time as you, and that lets them know that the town is aware that this project is coming before you. So the health department's already sees it. The county planning, we just received a response on a project that the Dutchess County Department of Planning said is totally incomplete. You're still gonna see it. You'll make recommendations or comments, but when the applicant comes back with their second revision, if they meet everything we're looking for and the county's looking for, we will then send it to them again. If we have to do a lead agency, which you can pick up SECRA when he talks about that, then we have to wait 30 days for Dutchess County Planning and everyone on that list. So it depends, again, through that list, who's affected by it. So if it's a subdivision on a state, I'll say a county road more, county has to weigh in, but the ZBA may get it because maybe there'll be variances, so they might be interested. So some things play out later down the road, but everyone's gonna know that you're looking to be lead agency, which is a secret item.
Talk about.
So when someone leaves here and you tell them to resubmit, again, it comes back to the office. There's a lot of in the office. I'm just gonna jump ahead to 6 because you kind of touched on it. What happens when this board approves something? Party begins in the office. So it's very, very, very rare to have a project that doesn't have conditions. Even a simple one will mean, bring us maps, have it signed, bring us the taxes that we want to make sure your land taxes are paid. You know, it could be as simple as that. But in most cases, there are quite a few conditions. So it can stay in the office from anywhere from 2 or 3 months to over a year because the DEC moves slower. The health department might be giving a hard look. So it could stay with us a long time, but until they meet all those requirements, it's not leaving. We will not accept a building permit. CarMax is working for us to take a building permit. I have to explain to them. We do not have the room to just hold your permit. I don't have the staff to look at it before it's approved and Bruce has signed it. And my issue is, what if they can't meet some of those conditions and has to come back? Why am I gonna get a building permit that you may have to change? So finish in one place before you come to the next. So no building permit will be looked at and or issued until B sends out the plans, whether it's a site plan or a filed subdivision plan that Bruce has signed. And so how do we get Bruce to sign it? When the applicant brings in, their professional, 4 copies of what they feel finishes what you wanted with all the conditions met, it gets sent out to your consultants. And for the different things that they do, they check off that everything was met. And until everyone has signed off, it just stays with us. Bruce comes in when Malcolm has said all the planning issues have been taken care of, John feels all the, anything to do with the engineering, and Jim may have to deal with easements, different types of legal documents. And only then, when everything is taken care of, will Bruce come in. So that's just kind of to give you what happens before, behind the curtain, and after. And sometimes they can't meet it, and then they have to come back to you. And also, you get subdivisions, a preliminary subdivision, a lot of times that's where they'll deal with the health department before they come to final, so they know they can get those lots.
So they know they got the board of approval, lot approval.
So you want to hit secret?
Yeah, sure. Does anybody, before we dive into a totally different and somewhat complicated subject, does anybody have comments? Does anybody need to take a break, go to the bathroom?
Secret's a big dive.
I'm gonna try and make it as simple as
And
possible.
just because I'll forget at the end.
Please.
I'm getting old.
Yeah.
Like you were a little late. You will get an email from B as soon as it's set up by Dutchess County. But on Thursday, May 30th, they're going to have a class at the Cooperative Extension on Route 44 in Millbrook. And the county planning does this. And they're two good classes for new people here. The first class from 4 to 6 is going to be secret basics. In 2 hours, it probably isn't long enough, but it'll give you a good, strong feel if you're not familiar with secret. There'll be a light dinner. They do wraps, they're actually very good. And then they're gonna do an hour and a half on skills that make great board members. So seeing 4 of you, I just thought that is a great course. And then there will be a 2-hour course on lighting. It is yet to be announced. We don't know the date yet.
On what, Barbara?
On lighting.
Lighting.
And we don't know, they haven't coordinated what date. And there will also be a lunch and learn for an hour on how to run a good meeting. So that will be from 12 to 1 on a date still uncertain. So as soon as those dates are set up, and Eventbrite is set up for the May 30th, Dee always gets these notifications and she'll make sure you all have it. But I just wanted to put May 30th on the calendar, because I think that would be good.
Yeah.
That's good.
You teaching that class, Bruce?
Am I teaching it?
Yeah, how to run a good meeting?
No, I'm not teaching it, but,
He should be.
yeah. That was part of the process, was what, setting that up, as was Barbara. Because we both sit on the Planning Federation Board for the county. So like when these classes come up and the Planning Federation actually picks the classes and, tries to get things in there to cover, to give classes for all across the board, for somebody that's just starting out, on a planning board, to somebody that's got years on the planning board. So you're not, just kind of getting the basics over and over again. So they're trying to balance it out, which is good.
And let me say, I've been doing this for over 25 years, and I go to the I go to those, I go to those, and they're helpful. I mean, obviously, I do this day in and day out, so I know most of it. But one of the things is, the regulations change, the cases change, nothing in this area is static. So that's the reason why there is a continuing education requirement, because everything changes. And that's always a good resource to see what's new and what's changed, particularly with respect to signs. There was, and that was one of the ones that I went to, because the U.S. Supreme Court had issued an important decision, probably 4 years, I think 2019, so 5 years ago, which really changed the landscape on how municipalities can regulate signs. So, and you want to see what the changes in the law are and things like that. So, those things are, really good. And, New York State now, local government, which is part of the Department of State, they now have like YouTube videos. So, those.
And in your packet tonight is the most current module that we used at the last sign workshop. So it really, I think a lot of times we get lost in, is it really a sign or is it free speech? So this really goes through the differences and the things that you can control and regulate and things that people have a right to have on their lawn. And that's mostly in residential, you don't really get that with
Well, speaking of ever-changing landscapes and living documents, the first thing that is good to know about the seeker process is that it is constantly changing and being updated. They're always trying to simplify it, to adapt it, to have it make more sense, because it can be very complicated and confusing, or just Byzantine. And the first thing that I would refer to you is the Seeker Handbook. If you Google Seeker Handbook, I'll also send out the link to everyone. You have it already?
I also, it's hooked to the back of your
That's also very useful.
secret handout. I have put, this chart is really the, how to follow it. So like when I talked to the zoning board on Tuesday, it clearly says area variances, you're done. But if it was it depends, there's always, we caveat that something might need it, but for the most part, setbacks in someone's yard, height, these all are type 2, so the ZBA doesn't have to go any further.
Yeah, we'll get into what
The
type
chart
2
is
is. You gave them all the fourth edition of the secret handbook, the 212
It was
page?
a short version from the state.
Okay.
So,
I don't have enough room to take.
the,
No, I wouldn't have been
New York,
surprised.
New York- the seeker handbook is online, and actually, it is pretty voluminous.
It's really well written. It's written almost like a list of frequently asked questions. Any question
That's what this one is.
is the
I have
frequently
to
asked
color
questions?
because in the first few pages, it's all that other part of the volume, this one I can go in and read.
Uh,
That's really good.
It's very nice to read through it and to have a question and find that question.
What is that called?
It's called the Secret Handbook. It would be the fourth edition. Came out in
We
2020.
can circulate the link
Yeah, I'll
to
send
the
the link out
PDF.
to everyone.
And one of the things too is, as your attorney, it's frequently cited by courts. So if there's, it's like, it's the, I won't say the Bible, but it's a lot of some of the seeker regulations are a little bit dense. And they use particular terms, and the seeker handbook does a very good job of providing examples.
Yeah, and
of
also
the
it's,
terms.
instead of just reading through pages and pages of regulations, it's written in such a way of, what if? When this, then what, right? I mean, it will be your questions as you navigate Seeker, you will have questions. And it is written in such a way that each header is that question, and here's your answer, here's an example of it. The next logical follow-up question is the next header, right? And it'll walk you through it. But to give a very simplified crash course in Seeker, Seeker's the State Environmental Quality Review Act. It's going to be the template by which we look at the environmental impacts of various actions. And environmental is a very broad term used here. It's the trees, it's the flora and fauna, but it's also the people who live there. It's going to be community character. It's going to be infrastructure. Pretty much any way that you could possibly imagine something impacting its environment, it's looking at that, and then probably a bunch of ways that you can't yet imagine how something would impact its local environment. When you get an application in, you need to make a determination under Seeker which of the three categories it's going to fall under. So there are type 2 and type 1 actions. Type 1 actions are bigger actions that are expected to have a larger impact, and type 2 actions are smaller actions that are expected to have a smaller impact. And both of those are going to have a list of criteria, right? If it's above a certain square footage, if it's above a certain number of parking spaces, type 1 has sort of a bottom threshold, and anything above it is automatically categorized as type 1. And type 2 has the inverse of that, right? Anything below a certain size in a bunch of different criteria, and it's type 2. Most applications that will come before you are going to be somewhere in the middle, and they're what's called an unlisted action. So once you determine if it's a type 1, type 2, or an unlisted action, that's where your flow chart starts to branch out. If it's a type 2 action, if you take a look at it and you determine that it's a type 2 action, you don't have to do anything more. That's the end of the Seeker process. Type 2 actions don't have follow-up Seeker actions. If it's a type 1 action, that means that we're assuming it's going to have a larger impact. It means we have to do what's called a coordinated review, which means that we reach out to other agencies. Usually, the planning board serves as the lead agency in a coordinated review, which just means that everybody's going to be included. Everybody who needs to be included in the process is going to be, but one of those involved agencies is going to be in charge. And typically, if it's an application that's coming before you, you would be in charge. You would circulate for lead agency.
So is that what you do in the background, the coordinating all
So
that?
I can see where the confusion, when it first comes in, you will see on that sheet, that goes out, that's the
Yep.
first step. If it needs a coordinated review, this board will motion to, I'm losing my words.
Circulate for lead agency.
Circulate for
That's it.
intent to serve as lead agency.
Yeah.
And Malcolm, or whoever's gonna write it, sends it to B sends it to all those agencies with the EAF, so they have everything. And a lot of times it's redundant because they already have it. And then we wait the 30 days to make sure that no one
Yeah.
has objections. Some of the different agencies we send it to will actually send a letter. We have no objection to the agency. But for the most part,
Some of
they
them
just don't answer.
you don't hear from, and after 30 days, if you haven't heard from them,
Continue and move
you
forward.
assume not.
So the important thing there is, one of the things that comes in with any application, well, let me take it, two things. Any application that comes in must have a seeker review. So that's one thing. So the board cannot act without a seeker review. So if it's a type 2 action, the board looks at it and says it's a type 2 action. So type 2 actions are a lot line adjustment on a subdivision plat where no new lots are created. You've got a amended site plan for an existing building, and you may be changing a couple of parking spaces or putting a bump out on Adams of, where they're extending a cooler, when it's less than, what is it, 10,000?
4,000?
Yeah,
4,000.
yeah.
Less than 4,000 square feet. So those are type 2 actions. Maintenance, if somebody's going to go in and replace a building, replace a garage or something that's on the site, and they want to, it's falling down, they want to put in a new garage, that would be type 2. Or we had them back in the day where gas stations would put up the canopies over the top with the fire suppression systems. Those were type 2 actions. So those are the typical type 2 actions. But one of the things is that the determination is made based on the EAF, an environmental assessment form. So there's two types of EAFs. There's what's called a full environmental assessment form, which is the whole shebang. It's probably 10 pages.
I think it's 13 plus the
Yeah.
workbook pages.
13, yeah. It used to be 10.
The short is shorter, but
Sure.
typically if we see an application come in and I look at it and I can tell this is not a type 2 action, this is going to be unlisted, or this is going to be a type 1 action, we ask for a full EAF. Because that's going to give us a lot of much more detailed information pertinent to a seeker review.
Right, and one of the important things at this stage regarding lead agencies is, be it a short form or a long form EAF, it's going to, one of the sections says, these are the other agencies which must approve this application. And that's important that, when I look at it, and Malcolm looks at it, and Barbara looks at it, is you need to look at those approvals and make sure, although those are correct, that they haven't left anybody out, because everybody who's going to approve the application and in its coordinated review needs to be sent a notice. And as I said previously, there's another type of agency which is called an interested agency, which may not necessarily have approvals associated with the application, but they may be interested in that application. For example, a neighboring municipality, or
One that comes up a lot is
Dutchess County
agricultural.
Airport. Dutchess County Airport's another one.
Yes. Dutchess County agricultural.
right,
Yeah.
right, yeah,
Ag district.
yep.
Somebody who might be impacted but would not necessarily be granting a permit or, Now, another thing that I'm going to add to the email, I'm going to send you all the seeker handbook, which, you are free to look through and to see if there are
Right
questions
after
that
we're
you
done with
have.
this stack.
And again, that 2-hour course in May is going to go into a deeper dive than tonight, because again, that's 2 hours. And it will be really relegated to what you need to know as a planning board, to help you. I mean, there's a lot more, but this will give you a good basis of what you're going to be looking at.
What I'll also send you is 617.4 and 617.5, and that's going to be the list of criteria for type 1 and type 2 actions, just to give you an idea of where those bars are, right? And like we said, it's easy, it's nice when it's a type 2 action, that's convenient. The things that are type 1 actions are very obvious, that's a huge application, of course that's going to be a type 1 action. And most things are unlisted. Most things are somewhere in between, and that's where we start to use a little bit more judgment as to, let's look at this. As an unlisted action, you don't need to do a coordinated review like we were just talking about. You can do your own secret review, and everybody else can do their own secret review if they have approvals. What has often been the practice of this board, though, is let's take a look at it. Are there a bunch of other agencies involved? Is this a complicated unlisted application? In which case, let's circulate for lead agency. Let's do the coordinated review. That's up to the discretion of the board. But that is a possibility with an unlisted action. If it's an unlisted action, but it is minor or simple, or there's nobody else really involved, we can do an uncoordinated review. You don't need to circulate for lead agency. Now, the next step in this process, once you're looking at an application under seeker, would be, let's say you've circulated for lead agency, you're doing your initial seeker review, let's call it. Now, you need to make a determination of significance, and they're called a neg dec or a pos dec, negative declaration or a positive declaration.
Let me just go back one step to the coordinated review.
Yeah.
And this is actually pretty important. With respect to a coordinated review, when there is a coordinated review, the determination of the lead agency with respect to the significance is binding on the other involved agencies that are participating in the coordinated review process. So one of the things is that that's actually beneficial to the applicant, because if they're going before the DEC or going before county DPW, they don't necessarily have to go through another seeker review process. So it's all done in one shot. So that's the benefit, both primarily for the applicant, in that they don't have to go through it again. And you also don't want to have the situation where you conduct a seeker review on an unlisted action and then they go to DEC. DEC does its own seeker review and says, no, we have a different criteria and we want to go through this and this. And they may then have additional information, which may change the application. And we get back to the point where we talked about conditions, right, which change things. So that's the benefit of coordinated review. And my philosophy is, to the extent that's possible, unless Malcolm said it, where there's no other involved agency or it's so minimal that you would need to do it, coordinated review is usually the best option.
Yeah, we very rarely do uncoordinated reviews.
And keep in mind, whether it's a subdivision or a site plan, they're not waiting for you to give them approval and then they're going to the health department and the DEC. They're doing this at the same time. So, because we couldn't really give them approval until we know they have health department, or at least conditional health department, and the DLT or the DPW. So while they're meeting with you, they're also meeting with these other agencies. And like you mentioned, SHPA, whoever it is, they're working behind the scenes to get those approvals so that they can bring that to you for a final approval. So that's all being done.
I would also mention, and despite the fact that it seems a little obvious, it does come up. The board cannot approve an application without concluding its seeker review. Again, if it's a type 2 action, that's simple. It's a type 2 action, seeker is concluded. But that brings us to negative and positive declarations. So I've always thought that these terms are sort of backwards in terms of what you would assume, because you associate the word positive declaration with good and negative declaration with bad. A negative declaration means that you've looked at it under seeker and you don't think that it's going to have a significant environmental impact. A positive declaration...
Let me just highlight one thing. The term you have to listen to is significant.
Yes.
okay? It's not that it has no impact, because pretty much nothing does.
Yeah.
So there's always going to be an impact, but the issue, so the criteria when you're looking at these applications, is the question is it significant or not? And one of the things that the regulations talk about is how to make a determination of significance. This is what the seeker process is about. It's about, is it significant? Because the seeker regulations acknowledge that there will be an impact. And that's so that's the process you're looking at. Nothing is going to come before you with no environmental impact. The question is, what is its significance? And that's the terminology that the regulations use. It's determination of significance. It's not a determination of impact. It's a determination of significance of the impact.
And where the planning board is the lead, is the planning board's judgment about determination of potential significant impact?
Yes, and provided that, and like I said, there, in the regulations, there are criteria as how to determine significance, and that's basically what the statute or what the regulations list, because the criteria for significance come out of the New York State seeker regulations, not the act itself. The act itself creates authority for the DEC to create regulations. So in the seeker realm, you're looking not so much at the statute, but at the regulations. And in the regulations, it has how to determine significance. And the environmental assessment form, the EAF, particularly the full EAF, will go through all the categories. Mm-hmm. So what you're doing when you're looking at when you're looking at the environmental assessment form, that's the checklist, if you will, that you use to determine significance, and it has all different, effect on water, effect on land, effect on community character, effect on, and you go through, and then it breaks it down again into subcategories with respect to, effect on water, groundwater, are new ponds being created. So it has a lot of different specific criteria, and so the way the EAF is done technically is the applicant, it comes in 3 parts, and the applicant prepares part 1. Technically, the planning board or the lead agency prepares parts 2 and 3. As a general rule, the applicant will supply what they think part 2 should be.
Yeah.
Take it with a grain of salt.
I will also include part 2 in the email that I will send to all of you, because that is a very useful checklist, yes or no, of what Jim is talking about, right? Of where these benchmarks of significance are. Because like you said, it is largely your judgment, but this yes and no checklist is going to give you a good idea, very useful guidelines for what is significant and not.
Particularly with respect to the issue, well, I shouldn't say that. So, land use boards very frequently get sued with respect to the determination of significance. If there's a neg deck issued and there's opposition to a project, neighbors or other parties will file a legal challenge saying that the board improperly issued a negative declaration. So this is a very important function of the board. And to your point, as far as judgment goes, one of the things that the courts look at is, did the board go through the environmental assessment form and review it and, specifically look at all the criteria? So, if it's a vanilla application where there's really no concern, you can look at it briefly, and the resolutions of approval will make a notation. But if it's a hotly contested application, my advice is typically to go through the record. The Tarpon Towers came to mind. It was,
give an example on that? Like, if we were to come across something like that, like, has there been a project where?
Let's say a project is going to involve the clearing of a substantial amount of mature woodlands. Let's say a project is going to include the disturbance of a wetland, something that you know, based on the EAF, is going to have habitat for endangered, threatened, or species of special concern. One good one, these are all sort of obvious ecological answers to that question, but, also something comes up is traffic, noise, lighting, community character, school district. If you think that an application is going to create a large demand that will impact available services, whether they be infrastructure or social services, you would look at all of that.
Fire department can't handle
Yep.
something in that project.
They put in a big development,
And
the
your
school
fire
count is
department
gonna
is just
go
not
up.
big enough to handle it or something.
Exactly.
Or the
Yeah.
building's too tall for them to handle or something. But
Or if you're planning to put something in that is totally out of character with everything else that's built around it, how's that going to affect community character or the local traffic patterns? All of these would be things that you would consider.
So with respect to the way the regulations are drafted, the default on a type 1 action, if meets the type 1 thresholds, what the regulations say is, it is presumed that a positive declaration would be issued and an environmental impact, I'm skipping ahead because Malcolm didn't get there, but when you have a positive declaration, that requires the preparation of an environmental impact statement. A negative declaration means there's no impact. As Malcolm said, it is kind of
A negative declaration would conclude your seeker review.
correct.
You've looked at this, you've determined that it's not going to have a significant environmental impact. Seeker has concluded, you can move forward with your review.
So, having said that, a lead agency may issue a neg deck in a type 1 action, and it may issue a pos deck in an unlisted action. It all depends on the situation. And again, to your point, I mean, the courts will defer to the judgment of the planning board.
So I just want to bring up, with pause deck, if you, from the time they come in, you're not happy with the project because of it, it's causing problems in any of these areas, whether it's wetlands or disturbance or traffic, I implore you not to wait 6 months to issue a pause deck, because that's where we get into some trouble. I think that, and it's only fair to the applicant, if upfront within the first 2 or 3 meetings, you see that this is not going in a good path, I think it's better if this board start, we don't issue a lot of pause decks, by the way, but if you were, that you should do it up front, where the project, before they've spent an incredible amount of money on engineering, et cetera, they can either leave and say it's not worth it, or at least they can start a deeper review of their project to start the process.
So, and I will explain why frequently an applicant will implore you not to make a pause deck. Let's look into this without you having to make a pause deck. Let's try to get you the answers to these questions, and I'll explain why. A positive declaration means that you are, you've looked at this under seeker, and it is expected that there will be some significant environmental impact. Now, a positive declaration is not you saying no to a project. A positive declaration starts another round of much more detailed review that has very specific requirements for public involvement and the degree to which that environmental impact investigation needs to be done. It frequently takes a long time. And that is why applicants frequently, if they get a positive declaration, sometimes they'll just walk away, or they will pressure a board not to make a positive declaration. Let's just give you a traffic impact statement separately. You don't need to make a positive declaration. Let's give you a wetland report separately, because a positive declaration has a certain timeline that they're trying to avoid. But a positive declaration also has a number of benefits to it. You're going to get a lot of information. The public is going to be brought in. They're going to provide a lot of information. They're going to provide a lot of comments. And The best part of a positive declaration, what the process that results from it, is that you ask the applicant to prepare the analysis of alternatives. This is the project, this is the preferred alternative, this is the one that they're presenting. We also want you to take a look at, these 5 different variations of the project, which might have different environmental impacts. And then you'll choose the preferred alternative that's going to minimize and mitigate the environmental impact.
So it could really change the.
It can change a lot.
Of the original project.
It gives you a lot more information to work with. But again, it's not a denial, it starts a long process. That long process has a lot of details, which we don't need to get into this evening, but in brief, first you're going to prepare, the applicant is going to prepare a scope. A scope is sort of you can think of it as the table of contents for the next document that they're going to bring you. It's going to be a list of all of the items that they need to cover in the next document. The next document is called a draft environmental impact statement, or DEIS. Now, these are frequently documents that are several hundred pages long with several more hundreds of pages of appendices and technical addendums to support the analysis that is in that. And that's going to be, it's a book that has been written that describes all of the environmental impacts and what they're proposing to do to mitigate those impacts. Throughout this process, there are various public hearings. People come in, the public comes in, and they're going to add to the scope. They're going to add to the things that need to be looked at. They're going to make comments on the DEIS when that comes in. And then after the DEIS, something that's called a final environmental impact statement comes in, which is going to be all of the questions that the planning board, the involved, the interested agencies, and the public, everybody who has read this document has made comments on it or asked questions. And the FEIS is going to list all of those questions. It's going to answer all of those questions. And it's also going to include any changes to the draft environmental impact statement that needed to be made in order to clarify those comments. After that, the planning board would issue what's called a finding statement, which is your conclusion on the process, right? You think that these things aren't such a big deal. You think these things are a big deal, but they've been mitigated in these ways. Or you think that this is a big deal and it's a showstopper. There isn't sufficient mitigation proposed. And you either, you're going to approve the project in one of the many forms that have been presented, or you're going to deny the project. But that is the longest way in which you can conclude seeker and then move forward with your approval of a project.
And just to add one point with respect to that, so on a coordinated review, each agency that is granting an approval issues their own finding statement for their approval based on the DEIS and FEIS that's prepared by the lead agency. So if DEC is going to issue an approval, they would issue a finding statement, or Dutchess County Health Department if they would issue a finding statement. So, that's assuming that they have to, some of the other agencies, their permits or whatever may be type 2 actions that don't require approval. Frequently, like a driveway permit from New York State DOT is a type 2 action under their regulations and doesn't require, while the overall project may, be considered a type 1 action, getting a permit from New York State DOT may just be a type 2 action. So, but yeah, so it's important that those environmental impact statements be good, comprehensive documents, because other agencies, involved agencies, are also relying upon those.
And so that's part of the AF, and that's going to go out when we circulate the lead agency, so they can see what they've submitted before we make a secret determination.
Yeah. Just to, with all of that on the table, revisit what Barbara and I were talking about earlier. Frequently, applicants will put pressure to avoid the positive declaration route and try to provide information to assuage fears or propose mitigation to environmental impacts to encourage you to make a negative declaration as opposed to. But
I mean, the other option too is the applicant has the ability to change the project.
yes,
You know,
to something that
reduce-
you would feel more comfortable
So,
granting a
I mean,
negative declaration.
and that's one of the, kind of the negotiating points, if you will.
Yes.
If it looks, if a project, may just, I mean, the board thinks that it may have impacts, but, if it's a 15-lot subdivision, which is having some impacts on the wetlands, maybe if they reduce it to a 14-lot, a 12-lot subdivision and
Change the
reduce,
layout, yeah.
change the layout, then a negative declaration is appropriate. So that's one of the ways that, you can use that, which is that's very common.
Yeah.
You have questions?
Yes, so, what you're saying is if we see a potential positive declaration issue, the sooner the better to let you know.
Yes.
right? And I would think that it's like due diligence anyway, of like, protecting ourselves to make sure that we're doing
Yes.
this process properly.
But
And-
you issue a POSDEC after careful consideration. It's not just,
Sure, yeah.
But don't
look at it.
kick the can down the road either,
Don't wait
right?
so
If it's going to happen, it's best to do it early. One of the many reasons for that, like Jim was saying earlier, it's very important to establish a good record to support any decision that you're going to make. And there is no better way to establish a record than a positive declaration and the process that follows it. That's going to be the best record that you can prepare. There's going to be a lot of information that is brought to you. There's going to be a predetermined calendar for how and when the public comes in and contributes to the process. There's going to be a lot of documentation, comment, and response that will then support whatever decision you end up making.
So, and the regulations also require that the determination of significance be made as soon as possible in the application process. So that's actually in the regulations themselves. So, the sooner the better. There's no time frame as to when it should be made. There's an advisory, time at which it should be made, but, basically what the regulations, kind of the default provision would be, if there's a concern as to whether or not there is an impact, and what it says is, with respect to the determination of significance, what you're saying is, there may be an impact. So if there may be an impact, then you issue a POSDEC. If you don't think there is an impact, or it's been proven that there's no impact, then a neg deck is warranted. So what the regulations, the language of the regulations are more saying is, if it's a question, if it's a coin flip as to whether or not it has an impact or not, the regulations presuppose that, you should call for a POSDEC.
Could you talk for a minute on, there's a lot of public input on the POSDEC process.
Yeah.
If it's not a POSDEC, what's the form for public input on
So,
projects?
As a board, when you feel you have enough information for the public to weigh in, so the first time they come out, depending on who's submitting, some people, cross their eyes and cross their T's and dot their I's, and others give you 50%. So that engineer or architect might need one or two more submittals till you feel you have enough. But whether it's 2 meetings or 4, when you feel you have enough for the public, then you set a public hearing, and the public comes in, and they can ask you questions. And depending on the project, if you feel all the questions have been answered, or they're not of high significance, you may close the public hearing on a lesser project. If the project obviously has public outcry, and you get those, then it would behoove you to not close it, adjourn the public hearing. You ask the applicant to answer the questions. A lot of questions they're not going to answer right then. We want the public to speak to the board. We're making a record, the applicant's making a record, and then they need to submit the answers. And when that comes back as an adjourned public hearing, the public has the right to get up again and ask, deeper questions if they don't feel they were really answered, different questions, you know, somebody who may not have come out to the first one might say, wait, nobody asked that question. So an adjourned public hearing can go on as long as you feel you still need more information. So the public has a big say before you close it. I mean, and then you'll have others show up at a public hearing and no one will show up. So it really, you know, those are smaller projects. So that's what the
Yeah.
public is about. Once we have a POSDEC, now you have a scoping session.
Right,
That's a public hearing of its own. And the public can weigh in again. So they've gotten the first public hearing, they've got the scoping session, right? We have one at the end.
There's several
Yeah, so they have
opportunities
a
through a
lot of
POSDEC.
We'll
So-
also get some stuff mailed in or emailed in
Yeah.
on a public hearing on that subject, and they'll just forward us the letters that anybody may write.
So also with respect, so public hearings seeker provides an opportunity to have a public hearing in the seeker process. With respect to subdivision application, there's technically a separate public hearing that's required. We typically merge the two together. But by statute, before a board can grant a subdivision plat approval, it must hold a public hearing on the approval of the application, technically separate and apart for seeker. You know, the board can make a determination of significance under seeker without holding a public hearing. It is not obligated to hold a public hearing, but should it desire to hold one, it certainly is permitted to do so. And then with respect to, similar to site plan as well, our code requires a public hearing on a site plan. However, if the board determines that it's a relatively minor site plan, the board has the authority to waive that. And I believe all our special permits require public hearings.
I think we changed it to like small home occupation.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, sure.
salon. But actually, you'd want that, because somebody's gonna open a business in their house, and you want the neighbors to have the opportunity to weigh in on traffic, noise, and whatever they feel is going to affect the character of their neighborhood. But we do get a lot of amended site plans. So if no one came out when it was actually the site plan, and they're coming in for something rather small, that really nobody's going to come out for, you can waive it. And on some that come in that are not that big to begin with, it might be their first site plan, you also have the opportunity to waive it.
Case by case.
So I'm going to move on. Do you have any questions on SECR? SECR, we could stay here for 2 days.
But
Architecture.
back to the point, so with respect to seeker, the New York State DEC has a lot of information. They've got the handbook. There's on the website, believe it or not, it comes under the heading of permits. So, if you do a Google search for New York State DEC seeker regulations, there's tons of information on their website. There's frequently asked questions. There's materials where you can, it can assist you in filling out the environmental, considering the review of the environmental assessment form. So there's a lot of information on seeker on their website, which is very good. Sorry.
So we're going to move on to architectural review. We touched on conceptual. So if somebody comes into my office and wants to do something that probably won't get you approval, I would recommend that you do a conceptual. It's $250. There's no escrow. You will get it in the mail, but the gentleman here will not. They'll get it in front of them that night, so there's no escrow charge. So unfortunately for the applicant, you can look at what they've given you and give them a rough idea of whether you like it, whether you feel you'd be willing to move ahead. They can weigh in on it from what they see. So it's not in depth, but there are a lot of people who you come back again because they didn't see you really excited about it. And before they spend a lot of money, it's a good way. Some people just have an idea and they have the right to ask you. So in that same vein, years ago, if somebody wanted to paint their building, change the windows, this is commercial by the way, do something different, they would have to do an amended site plan, and the cost of that was prohibitive. So what we found was a lot of buildings were starting to really fall into disrepair, or just get old, like they needed to update. But it just became very expensive. So I'm not gonna name places, but a particular place wanted to do something and just change a little bit of the front. And by the time they were done with engineering, escrow, everything, it cost them $7,000, and the woman said, that was my budget to do the work. So we talked about it here, and we talked about what we could do, and we came up with an architectural permit, application. So there's minor and major. So if somebody just wants to come in and get a bigger sign, somebody wants to paint their building and maybe do something with the windows, they can also pay $250. No escrow. It kind of comes to you the same way you get it in advance. They get it that night to weigh in, because a lot of those are just yes or no. You like it or you don't. They show you what they have, they show you what they're proposing. It's kind of an opinion. And you have architectural review powers. So I brought things in, like Bikeway wanted to change the stripe to something, a bold yellow, and they gave you the yellow, so you could weigh in, is it too yellow? But they didn't have to spend thousands of dollars for you to say yes or no. And then there's a more major one with escrow, when somebody, Bar Oda, which was the old Hudson Fish, they used to have what was like a lighthouse on the roof, and they wanted to take that off. They wanted to do a lot more than just change the color of the awning. So they came in with their renditions, and again, you reviewed it, but you were able to ask for some input, structurally or architecturally. And that has allowed a lot of the businesses to be able to really change and update it and modernize without being here for 4 months,
Barbara, a quick question. The architectural review, the original site plan review for whatever project that was, it didn't look at paint colors or anything, did it?
It did at the time, so if someone's building a building, they have to show you architecturally what it's gonna look like. They have to give you renditions and colors and pictures, because when you're done and they build a building, I've gotta go out and make sure that they put the right windows, their shutters, everything. I'm going to go by what you approve. So sometimes they'll come to me midstream and they'll say, we didn't realize we really needed a door toward the back because of garbage. That's a field change. It's not affecting what the building looks like to the general public. So there's always field changes. But if they want to come back and do something completely different, they have to come back to you. And that could be quick. But Adams had an issue where when the construction plans actually came in, they bumped out a corner that wasn't on their original approval. And it was more than just 2 feet out. So we made them come back just to show you and make sure you were okay, so that after it was built, the board didn't go, that's not what we approved. So you got a chance at that. But a lot of times buildings have been up for 20, 30 years, and they're out of date, or they're run down. So you get a chance, 1070, 1072, just recently, it was an older log square building with some doors and windows, and they came in to change it, make it the stucco look, give it all different designs, color, and you were able to approve that, this board, and now it's being done, and the building is modern and new and fresh, which also helps them get tenants. Nobody wants to rent where it looks old or dumpy. So we did this to kind of bring them in so they could move forward without making the whole review of their lighting and their landscaping. Because sometimes they just want to do something just aesthetic. So that's
more for like a cosmetic,
it is, once it goes more than that, and I will tell you, sometimes they come in and say, I'm just doing this, and then they come in, and
Plus this.
and we're changing the light, and I'm looking at the sign, and it's like, whoa, let's stop, now you need an amended site plan. So sometimes people come in, and they've changed, they figure, for $250, I'm gonna get my dollar worth. But it's a whole different thing that these guys may have to review. Some things might affect the engineering, and then they need to look at it, and we need more plans. But for the most part, architectural review, you would do in any site plan completely, and that would be part of the site plan. But for somebody who just wants to change and update the building or change a color, that's something it's your opinion. So we've shortened that, and that's allowed the people, the commercial properties to really
Which makes sense.
move forward. Site plans. So I'll start with site plans and then you can all weigh in. So if somebody wants a site plan from scratch, I think we need Tractor Supply, so if you're watching that. I'm just in there. So Tractor Supply was just woods, it was an empty lot for the longest time on Route 9. So to build their building, they came in with a site plan, and that included engineering, planning of it, it went to all the agencies so they could weigh in. New York State went in because they're close to the traffic light, so the placement of their entrance was very important. It turned out that they needed to move it further north, which then impacted Acura that was next door. So that site plan wound up, we changed both, and they had an easement, right there, an easement between them.
Yeah.
And then it found out that Acura would only have an out, so now what do? They need an entrance. So they also, they have cross-access easement between Acura and Tractor Supply that's in the lot. And they come out on the Tractor Supply side. So a site plan, we cover everything in that. The lighting, we have new lighting regulations that a lot of the site plans do not want to adhere to. They want, as somebody had once coined, make it look like an airport. Signage, everyone wants the biggest sign. It's not Las Vegas. Lighting is huge because LEDs now are a lot brighter than the fluorescent and the other type of lights. So we're looking at every aspect of the site. You want to pick up on that?
Well, I went to the bathroom, but,
Oh, sorry. Just site plans in general, like each one's a different animal, and yet there's so many similarities. So after you've done a few, you'll see the flow of it.
I think you'll absolutely start to pick up on what is consistently an issue, what is consistently called into question, what the board consistently gets pushback on. I mean, there's, exactly like you said, they're all different. One size does not fit all, but there are patterns in terms of what the issues are. Just because of, the geography of the town and everybody is operating under similar constraints. One thing that keeps coming up is that as the town gets built out over the years, everybody starts with the best pieces of property. Now that it is largely built out, the pieces of property that are left are the ones that nobody wanted in the first place. And so you are going to consistently get properties that have issues with wetlands, issues with flooding, issues with steep slopes, whatever it was that made somebody look at that and say, no, I want to build on that farm field over there. I don't want to build over here.
It's going to be cheaper.
It's going to be cheaper, it's going to be easier, it's going to require a lot less work, but now that's all that's left. So that's going to be something that consistently comes up.
Now, an amended site plan, you have a site, it's 30 years old, they want to change the use, maybe put a big addition on it. This is a chance for you to look at the lighting that might have been put in 30 years ago.
Yeah.
This is a chance that the landscaping has died off,
Yeah.
and it's naked, like you have a few bushes. This is a chance to don't just look at the use and the addition, but now is a good chance to beautify it better for the town as something we visually see, to put in more landscaping, maybe change the lighting. And a lot of times they'll want to change the signs, sometimes the old signs, they want to do channel letters, but we're looking at how they're lit, backlit, LED. A lot of times there's a condition that you do that gives me the right, if it's too bright, to make them turn it down. A lot of LED gas stations, they can adjust that. Starts out one brightness, and then I'm driving one day, and I'm like,
Yeah.
and it's like, I think I need to make a little bit.
9D.
So, but you get to look at all of that. So whether it's new, or you're getting another chance to look at something that was old that doesn't fit into what the town wants to see, you get to look at it again and make changes. So
Yeah.
that's a really good plus for us.
There's often instances where something comes in and something about however the site was originally built out just never really worked. It was designed poorly at the time, or it doesn't fit there anymore.
or it's causing drainage.
Yeah, stormwater regs have changed over time greatly, and that's just been a huge challenge for a lot of these developers. And fortunately, we have some good developers that do it right, but if you don't, you wind up with problems.
Yeah, and like you said at the last meeting, things that didn't flood 10 years ago are flooding now. So,
Things changed this year.
yeah, it's only getting wetter.
This year
It's-
That's bad.
Yeah. So that's a big one. Did we talk about special permits yet?
Well, let me just, with respect to site plans, so the site plans are covered by Chapter 240 of the code, which is zoning. It's Article 9, and it begins at 240-82, which basically says any commercial project needs a site plan approval. Site plans are not issued for single-family residences, but apartment buildings, townhouses, condominiums would get site plan approval.
What about
And
duplex?
we don't permit duplexes in the town of
Just to go over
Wappinger.
that, our code doesn't allow two families, multifamily, unless the zone is RMF3 or RMF5, which would be residential multifamily, 3 acre or 5 acre,
Or it's going to be a mixed-use special
or a
permit?
mixed use.
Yeah.
But we have some two families and maybe a few duplexes, but just to go back to overview, our zoning came in 1963. So we have two families that were built, some on Osborne Hill, that predate zoning. So we consider them a legal, non-conforming property. But someone can't come in now and do that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
where we want one, so all residential zones, other than RMF5, are residential, 15, 20, 40. 15 is a third of an acre, 20 is half acre, 40 is an acre, and then we have R80, it's 2 acres, and it goes on. And you have some split zones, R20, 40. So we look at it, if they're usually smaller lots. So if they have municipal water, municipal sewer, I'll look at zoning for half acre zoning, so the setbacks are a little smaller. If they have a well and septic, then they need more space, it's still a small lot, so I'm gonna look at the 1 acre. And then we have, which always kills my office, we do have R30, it's kind of like not a zone we use, but if you have municipal water and a septic, or a well and sewer, then it goes to R30, and it just changes the setbacks a little bit. Not much for this board, but back with building.
But in the
codes,
office.
it's used
Just a
more in the office.
Question, kind of totally off topic. If you do have a property that is smaller than the regulations of the well and the septic, and there is an approval process for a mortgage, do you guys give an
Are you
approval?
talking about an empty piece of property?
No, a property that is,
It's already built?
yeah,
So it already has
before
a septic.
1960,
Right.
the zoning, yeah.
So I don't think that's a problem, it's existing.
So with respect to the well and the septic issues, if the distances for well and septic on those lots, the town does not control that. That's controlled by the health department. So there is a process whereby if you don't meet the minimums, you can get the equivalent of a variance. I'm not sure exactly what the health department calls it.
But if it's
Yeah.
existing, we're not gonna, the health department nor us are gonna come in and go, that doesn't work anymore. It's existing.
Because I've had somebody ask me that.
Right, but if your house, if you decide to, say you have a small house, and you decided to take it down and build a bigger house, that's gonna go to the health department, and then you're gonna have any problem.
Yeah.
And you may have to put a new septic or a new well in,
Yep.
or they're only gonna give you a 2-bedroom house,
Mhm.
because it's by the bedroom count. So that's not something you, as a board, would deal with, other than looking at houses and subdivisions, how many, the health department will decide whether they're 3-bedroom, or they can go 4 or 5-bedroom, in a new subdivision or building bigger homes.
Hmm.
So,
Question on
sure.
the site plan, you said Article 9, and this goes to the architecture review. Is there a separate chapter for architecture review?
I think it's just a section.
It's just a section. and-
What section would that be?
I was looking for it earlier and I couldn't find number.
Most of the architectural reviews are discretion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just asking what the code is.
Yeah.
In a, so in a.
Is it under the zoning
full
code?
plan, you're looking at everything.
Yes.
But in an architectural review, it's minor.
Right.
We're not looking at it being built from scratch. We actually, David did that whole work on architectural review, I just don't know if we early 2000s.
We'll bring a saw next year. We're gonna bring a saw.
I can't find it. I was looking for it earlier.
You gotta get a variance for that.
So, back to Article 9. So, basically, the process, what's in Article 9 is what's required to be in an application. And the person who makes a determination as to whether or not the application is complete is Barbara, the zoning administrator. And once there's a determination that it's complete, it then gets referred to the planning board for its review. The code actually says that a public hearing must be held, I believe, within 62 days.
Not in an architectural
No,
review.
no, not in, no, I'm just talking about site plans. So,
Section.
Um,
Follow.
so 24084 is what needs to be in the application. And it has the catch-all of additional information as may be required.
Well, and I want to just expand a little bit. You were talking before about an amended site plan, architectural review, different gradations of the plan, and I'm getting to the point where the question, you're talking about drainage. So there's an existing site plan, somebody wants to make a change, we don't know how big or small it is. What are the requirements for upgrading, for example, the drainage to modern standards? At what point do you hit that threshold? Is it based on, what's it called, an
Department of Health says
architectural
so.
review, or?
So the legal standard actually is probably the issuance of a building permit. So if a building permit is required, under the new MS4 standards that are applicable to municipalities, the new application would have to, before the town could approve it, the development would have to comply with MS4, I believe. So now, I'm not sure if there's any necessary waiver issues, because one of the issues is if you've got a commercial building that's built before zoning was enacted, there will be no site plan, because site plan approval was not required. So that building does not need a site plan until such time as they come in to make changes to the building, which would require a building permit. The way our code is drafted is, in order to get a building permit for a commercial building, you must get site plan review. Under the recent regulations adopted by DEC for construction and MS4 review, we have to approve the SWIP, the Stormwater Prevention Plan, for the site before we could issue a building permit. So part of that, I guess, would mean that it would have to be brought up to current standards. But
We might have to look at.
there's probably an exception for existing sites. I haven't really, because I know, we've got, I'm trying to think of the last project that we had come in, where we had an old building from like the 60s where,
Isn't there that one where there were like the 5 buildings scattered across that site on Route 9?
yeah, to Soane.
Yeah, to get a
But I think we
use.
did we do it?
Might be, I don't think, actually, I don't think so.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's really that's kind of the bugaboo of land use as a whole. Regardless of, the town of Wappinger isn't as bad as, say, the village of Wappingers Falls or the city of Poughkeepsie, where you've got a lot of really old buildings. And not as much space. But, that's the, you get the issues of grandfathering things and everything else. But it becomes challenging. And that's one of the things a lot of times where, as Barbara said, you'll see a lot of buildings where somebody wants to come in and make improvements to the building, but because of the requirements of the stormwater regulations or, whatever it is, it becomes cost prohibitive, and you see the building, continue in, whatever situation it is.
But to Robert's question, so in the early 2000s, F.B. Clark, which Malcolm came from, they've been bought out, the town board had asked them to do a whole architectural standards. And there is a book, there is a binder, that was really good, but it just never got adopted.
Right.
And that's why, at some point about 8 or 9 years ago, I said to the board that was sitting, can we do something like an architectural review when it's minor? And they're changing the color. Like, it's just very hard to hear people that own these buildings, and they just go, if I gotta go through 6 months and I gotta do engineering, I just wanna paint the building. So, you have to, we wanna help the town look better, so that's where we came up with these permits for minor. These are minor. If it gets into
So
the weeds.
that's sort of under the waiver provision. You're waiving all the normal
Because
application
they're not doing anything
process.
that's affecting the landscaping, the lighting, the parking.
The drainage, yeah.
I mean, the one issue is, we've got some internal ability to waive things, but the stormwater regulations in particular, we can't waive.
I understand that. I'm
And then-
talking about
Right.
determining
Yep.
whether it's a minor or major,
Right.
and you can implement the waiver
So I can
provisions.
usually tell if it's just color,
Right.
things like that, I'll let them come into the minor. If I feel there's a little bit more to it, and sometimes I really keep asking people to talk about it, we start getting into major renovations, and as soon as they go off the front of the building, or, the side of the building, they need an amended site plan. So, I spend a lot of time talking with people ahead of time, and I'm still surprised sometimes when I'm sitting here going, look at them, they never said.
They didn't talk- yeah.
6 paces away and couldn't hold,
Yeah.
so it depends. But just to caveat and add to site plans, so we have special use permits. Years ago, to get a special use permit, you would go to the ZBA. I don't know exactly what year that changed, but it might have changed in the 80s or 90s.
I think in the 80s.
80s. So who needs a special permit? Not everybody. But if you're an auto repair or a body, the special permit is a little extra than just the site plan that gives you the right to look a little deeper, because usually those businesses have more adverse effects, or could possibly have more adverse effects. So under 24037, if you go to it, and I can actually send it to you all tomorrow, there's the schedule of use, commercial, residential, and then dimensional, so those are setbacks. So if somebody is on Route 9, for the most part, 95% of Route 9 is HB, highway business. You could just go in that column and you see what's allowed. And when you look at it, if there's nothing in that spot, it means it's not permitted. Or it could say PP, principal permitted use, or it could say SPU, meaning special permit. And that's where we decide what type of businesses would require a special permit as well. You can also be a homeowner who wants, like we touched on, a hair salon, or a nail salon, or something like
Home
that.
office, home
office.
studio, artist
So they
studio,
can come
something
in and
like that.
just get a special permit. They don't have to do a whole site plan, because they're using a part of their office as commercial, but we don't need to look at the yard. We just basically look at the parking in their driveway. So they can't have, a hairdresser can only be themselves. They can't have 3 other women or men having chairs doing hair, because then you should be on Route 9. But if it's an individual and she's just cutting hair or dyeing hair and then using it, so she might have 3 visitors, she might have 3 visitors. She might have the person she's dealing, the person that's sitting because something's being done, and the next one came early. So we would look at the driveway to see that they can keep their business on their property. So, because the neighbors do get to weigh in, and they don't want to see cars parked in front of their houses while someone's running a business. So that's a special use, but just that, and there's no site plan with it. So that would be the difference.
I would add to that, like she said, special uses are things that we might assume or could expect would have a slightly higher impact to the neighbors. There are general provisions, sort of just saying, this doesn't have anything specific associated with it, but as the planning board, it needs a special permit. We should be paying a little bit more attention to make sure that this is not going to create a larger impact than anything else. And then under Article 8 in the zoning code, there are a long list of very specific special permits that have very specific requirements.
And
Conditions, things that, in addition to everything else that we would expect on a site plan, one of them would be an auto dealership, one of them would be a gas station, one of them would be a mobile home park, private schools, ground-mounted solar. It's a long list, and all of these are going to have sort of specific requirements, like, the setbacks need to be double than that of what they're normally in. Some of them have specific parking requirements. Some of them have specific design requirements. We don't want the overhead doors on an auto body shop facing the road. Again, so they're sort of the general ones that don't have specific requirements, and there's a long list of special permits that will have very specific
general
requirements.
would be office, retail, well, service, or like personal service. And then once you go into the other things, now you use special permit. But I'll just send you, that you can look at that, because a lot of people want to know in different parts of the town that there's changes. So HD, there's not a lot of places left HD, but HD requires 5 acres. So you look at the uses there, they're more intense uses, so we want bigger lots. HB is 2 acre. HM, it's actually how many thousands of square feet?
It's pretty small.
Pretty small.
Hamlet mixed use.
Or an NB for neighborhood business. So each thing is looked at, but you have to hit a lot of parts, where it is, what's the zone, what's the use, before it even comes here.
And for the special permit, so as Malcolm said, Article 7 has general provisions. So we have some things in our code that require a special use permit, which don't have any, what we call supplementary conditions. But, there's a list here in Article 8, as Malcolm said. And one of the things that the determination of the planning board would be is, in reaching your determination to approve the application, you would have to say that the application meets whatever specific criteria are there. And if you're going to deny the special use application, you would then say the application did not meet this particular criteria. So,
And there are criteria in general, too.
right.
For the most part, it's, is this going to create a larger nuisance or impact to the neighbors than anything that wouldn't require a special permit, right?
Correct.
But yeah, the supplementals are much more specific and specific to that use, that special permit use.
And then just from a legal point of view, so if there are special supplementary conditions for, say, a gas station, you have to meet all of the general conditions and the supplemental conditions. That's the
they don't
reason why they're.
replace- Exactly.
So that's an add-on to the conditions for the special permit. And so while technically this board is not making a determination as to whether the use is permitted in the zone, what this board is then looking at is basically, does the application as presented comply with the requirements of the special use permit? Basically, as a rule, so you've got uses that are permitted under zoning, and then a special permit use is legally considered to be something that's permitted under zoning, but it has some criteria that may cause impacts to the surrounding area that need to be mitigated in some way, and that's what the special permit conditions are. So in order to approve it, you just say that, that they meet the criteria to mitigate the impact. So the discretion of the board is limited to whatever the conditions are in the special permit. The board doesn't have the discretion to say, we don't like that particular thing in that area, you'd have to specifically call out what conditions it would not meet. Because the presumption is legally that it is permitted. I'll talk to subdivisions. I've spent a lot of time over the years litigating the issue. There's a case that the town of Wappinger was involved in called O'Mara versus the town of Wappinger. And for quite a few years, Jim Loeb would give a presentation every year at the Association of Towns as to how the case was pending, or what the current status of the litigation was. It was in litigation for probably 5 or 6 years. The town spent, this is back in the decision, I believe. So the case started in federal court. The property owner brought a case against the town because it involved open space conditions that were on a subdivision plat that was approved in 1963. The town assessor increased the assessment on the property, and it went at tax sale, and a person named O'Mara bought the property and was granted a building permit and put up the building. David Alexander, who was the original builder, his son saw a building going up and said, hey, that property is restricted as open space. The town then tried to negotiate with the building owner regarding basically the other pieces of the property as being remaining open space, and he could keep the house, but he denied that. So we then went to litigation. And he brought a federal civil rights claim and asked for the approval, the building CFO to be issued. It was litigated in federal court. The town lost at the trial court level. It was then appealed to the Second Circuit federal court, and the Second Circuit Court of Appeals said that there was a question as to whether or not the condition on the subdivision plat was enforceable against a subsequent owner than the original developer. So that was the legal question at hand. They referred the matter to the New York State Court of Appeals, which is the highest court in New York State, and the New York State Court of Appeals determined that the condition on the subdivision plat that was originally granted in 1963 was enforceable against all subsequent property owners, and the house had to be removed. Well, they just said that, and the federal court said the house had to be removed. So I was involved in the litigation of that. It went to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, to the highest court in New York State, back down to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, back to district court, federal district court in White Plains, and then back up to the Second Circuit. The town spent, back in 2008, approximately $750,000 litigating that case. It was not covered by insurance. So having said that, I learned a lot about how the subdivision process works. One of the things that it's important to think about what a subdivision plat does. And what a subdivision plat, the intent of a subdivision plat, while in addition to providing notice to the world about what's happening on the subdivision plat, because again, and this is basically what the New York State Court of Appeals found, is that the intent of the subdivision regulations is to allow the municipality to impose conditions, whatever the zoning or subdivision regulation conditions are, and have it binding on subsequent people. So for example, we have notes on our plats regarding wetlands, or regarding easements, or regarding common driveways, all of those things. And this board will spend many, many meetings going over applications and putting in all kinds of requirements. And what the Court of Appeals basically acknowledged was, what's the point of doing all that work if they're not enforceable against subsequent people? So at the end of the day, as you get more and more into it, you will look at the subdivision plats, and there's all kinds of notes, and there's call-outs to culverts and drainage facilities and roads and everything else. So that's one of the things that's important in looking at the subdivision process. But at the end of the day, it gets then, when the planning board approves it, the chairman of the planning board, after all the conditions of approval are met, we talked about that, it then gets filed in the county clerk's office. Now, what the New York State town law and real property law says is that if a town has a planning board, as I mentioned previously, a town doesn't need to have a planning board, but if it does, and that planning board is granted the authority to approve subdivision plats, a map that there can be no division of property into lots without the approval of the planning board. So so if I was an owner of a property, I cannot file a map saying I want to give half the property to my son and I keep the other half. I can't go up to the county clerk's office and record that. It will be rejected. It must be rejected as a matter of law because that has to come to this board. So it has to come to this board for a couple of reasons. One, you make sure that it complies with all the regulations of the town. And then secondly, that plat that gets recorded creates tax lots. So part of the other process in creating when you do a subdivision, you're creating, you're amending the tax map of the town of Wappinger. You're either taking a big lot and making it into smaller lots, or you're combining lots in the case of lot consolidation or lot lines. So you're changing the configuration of the lot, and that necessarily impacts the tax rolls. So that's one function of what a subdivision does. And that's, again, one of the reasons why it has to pass through the planning board. Because after the plat is filed, it comes back to the town. We have it filed here, and it also goes to the assessor's office. So each of those lots. So if I've got a 10-acre lot, one single 10-acre lot, I can only build one house on that one 10-acre lot. But if I have 1 acre zoning and I have a 10-acre lot and I split it into 10 lots, now I can build 10 houses, and that's that 10 acres now becomes basically 10 times more valuable. And that's going to affect the assessed value of the property. So that's basically one of the things that you're doing here in the subdivision process. The other thing in the subdivision process that the regulations require is that you're looking at the property in the context of, is this good planning? Are the roads sufficient? Is the drainage sufficient? Are the park facilities sufficient? Does it have water? Does it have sewer? If it doesn't have water and sewer, does it have enough space for a well and septic? So that's all part of the process. One of the things that the subdivision regulations in New York State were basically drafted in the 1930s for the most part, so things are. New York State is very, very antiquated in some areas. I will give you my favorite example. New York State highway law requires that the roads in New York State be a certain width. The highway law of 1809 established that a town highway must be at least 3 rods in width. The current highway law in the state of New York still requires a highway that is 3 rods in width. I don't think you can find anybody except for maybe some arcane municipal lawyers and surveyors that know how big a rod is. Anybody on the board know how?
It's like 17 hands.
It's 3 is a little less than 50 feet.
It's 16.5, right. It's 49.5. A rod is 16.5 feet, which is 10 chains, and I believe, but anyway. So the problem with the town law is the subdivision regulations haven't been really amended that much. So, they've added some secret regulations in Town Law 276 which sets, and again, in the subdivision regulations, you have what a distinction between preliminary plat, subdivision plat, and final plat approval. So what the preliminary subdivision plat does is it establishes the lot count. And when you're figuring out what the lot count is for a subdivision, you're going to be looking at some criteria. For example, on a larger subdivision, where you're going to create a road, you're going to have to make sure that the way the road is laid out on the site, the grading is sufficient. You know, you don't want a road with, you know, a 20% grade, which, you know, if it ices up, people are sliding out the road. Also, you know, where that road intersects with the connecting town or county road. So that's part of the things you're going to look at. You're going to be looking at, are there wetlands, are there steep slopes? And one of the things that, again, part of the subdivision process, you want to make sure that the lot that is approved is buildable. So under our zoning code, so one of the things is that a very strange way, the lot size that is required for a subdivision does not appear in the subdivision regulations. It appears in the zoning code. So the minimum lot size for a zoning district actually shows up in the zoning code. It doesn't show up in the, so if you look in the subdivision code, you're never going to find it, but it's in the zoning code. So in the district, you're going to have to look for, is it, as Barbara said, you know, or 20, or 15, or 40. Again, R40 is 40,000 square feet, which is just under an acre. R80 is 80,000 square feet. Then we have 3-acre and 5-acre zoning. Those are the minimum lot sizes in a particular district. So if somebody's coming in, R40, arguably a 1-acre zone. So if I got a 5-acre piece of land and I come in, I can theoretically, if all the things are the same, I can get 5 buildable lots out of that, maybe. But I probably can't, because if I need a road, I'm going to take that out, and that's going to be subtracted. If I've got a stream or some wetlands, the way our code's drafted, that gets netted out. So, you know, that's one of the things. And again, that's all part of the preliminary subdivision plat process. The way the subdivision regulations used to work was that, in essence, a developer would come in, or somebody, you know, property owner would come in, and they would get subdivision preliminary plat approval, and then they had to go in and build all of the infrastructure for the project before they could get final. We don't do that anymore. But that's still the way that the section is drafted. But rather than building out the infrastructure, what happens now is the board continues to have to review the process to get to final. The subdivision regulations require, our code and also Town Law 276 requires that there be a public hearing be held before preliminary plat approval. So before the planning board approves a plat, a subdivision plat, the public has to have the opportunity to weigh in. And that preliminary approval is, at that point, we'll talk about the legal term vested rights. So basically, once you get a preliminary plat approval, you've got some vested rights. Sometimes you've heard the term grandfathering, but it's not necessarily germane here. But in essence, when somebody has a preliminary plat approval, they have some vested rights going forward. And then what happens is, so that preliminary plat approval, you're looking at, as a general rule, does this configuration meet all of the requirements? But then to get to final approval, now you look at things more in detail. You're going to look at how the water and sewer is going to run. where the fire hydrants are going to be, where exactly the drainage, infrastructure is going to be. To get the preliminary approval, you're looking kind of at an overview, more like a 10,000-foot view of the project, whereas when you're getting to final approval, now you're looking at the nitty-gritty. For a lot of the projects that we have here, if they're maybe 10 lots or less, we sometimes combine the two where you get to preliminary and final at the same time, which is permitted under the code. One of the things is that if you've got, if you're going to do preliminary approval separate than from final approval, what the regulations say is if the final plat substantially matches the preliminary approved plat, you don't have to hold a second public hearing. But if there's substantial changes between the two, then another public hearing has to be held. So, we've got a couple of larger subdivisions floating out there, not too many, because there's, as Malcolm said, we don't have a lot of good land left. I tell my clients all the time when they come in that all the good land was built on years ago. But, so that's really the subdivision process. In reviewing the application, again, Barbara kind of does the gatekeeper function to see that it complies. All the applications will come in. One of the things you'll see is that what's called the zoning compliance chart. You see it on site plans as well, and it'll say, what the sizes of the lots are, that they all comply, and all of that stuff. So, but the subdivision process, that's kind of the general overview. Let me tell you one thing that's legally important, and the New York State town law does not define. What it basically says is each municipality gets to define what a subdivision is. So, for example, our code says that if we put two lots together, that's considered to be a subdivision, even though we're not subdividing, we're joining. The default in Town Law 276 is if you're moving a lot line, that's considered a subdivision, which we carry over. In the past, I've had situations where you have a very large old lot, which is on both sides of a road. And the road goes through the middle of the lot, but on the tax map, it's considered to be one lot, even though there's a road that's going through the middle of it. Some municipalities will actually say, now what the case law says is typically if the code doesn't address the issue, it's still considered to be one lot, even though there's a road between it and it does have two separate lots. The reason why that is because if you're going to split the lot up, you're going to change the tax map. So that's one of the things that, conceptually kind of think in the back of your head, because at the end of the day, the subdivision map is going to change the tax map.
So, just so you know, so years ago, if you wanted to do a lot line realignment or a lot consolidation, you would use the application for subdivision. It's overwhelming because who is usually doing that as a resident? So we've streamlined that as well. We have a separate permit for lot lines and consolidation of lots where we're just joining them. So we've done this, everybody weighed in so that, somebody down the street from you could give this to their surveyor and say, I need all this on here. It streamlines it in front of you, especially sometimes you've been going over their property with your driveway. And the guy's tired, he wants to sell it, he might just sell you or give you or whatever their private conditions are. And then maybe he wants a piece in the back because very few lots are square or rectangles. Some of them are very strange shapes. So that's another thing we've done to streamline that. Just quick, because we're John sitting here. We're an MS4 community, and not everyone is. Can you just give a quick synopsis of being an MS4 community?
Sure. So, being in the MS4 community, it's something that the DEC encouraged all municipalities in New York State to do back in the mid-2000s.
It was 2003, and then I think it became effective in 2006.
Yeah, so essentially, they're passing on the responsibility of proper stormwater management to the municipalities that agreed to become a part of this MS4 program.
Well, we didn't agree, the town of Wappinger didn't agree. The town of Wappinger was forced, because there's two ways to be in. One is if you agree to be in, or if you have a certain population level or population density, and the town of Wappinger fits that. So we had no choice.
So, yeah, I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty with what's required for stormwater pollution prevention plans, but essentially, for residential projects, if the amount of total disturbance exceeds 5 acres, you're required to provide what's called a full SWIP. If it's less than that, just a basic SWIP or an erosion control plan is required. And for commercial projects, the threshold is 1 acre disturbance. So it's very important in both the site plan and subdivision review process to make sure they're conforming with all the state's requirements, because ultimately, if there is a problem, the DEC could penalize the town for not doing the right kind of review. So that's one of our larger functions for this board, to make sure that all the projects that come before you conform properly.
And the SWIP is a stormwater infrastructure plan?
Stormwater pollution prevention plan.
And that's an MS4?
Yes.
So with respect to one of the things that John talked about so the 5 acre threshold, and the 1 acre threshold, the permit uses, this is a permit that's issued by New York State DEC, and what it requires is that if you get above these thresholds, you have to have what's called post-construction stormwater stormwater facilities, methods after permanent facilities to filter stormwater. So those are the stormwater basins that you see, or rain gardens, or vegetative swales, and the threshold there is 5 acres. So if there's less than that, basically what happens is you have larger open spaces where the stormwater runoff can be absorbed into the ground. But if you've got these larger disturbed areas, which includes roadways, parking lots, what they call impervious surfaces. So if you have a certain amount of that, then they have to be drained into a facility to treat it, to remove sediments or pollutants before then it gets discharged away from the site. And one of the things that the SWIP requires is that the flow of stormwater off the site after construction is no greater than stormwater flow off the site before construction. So in essence, it should have no net impact. So, basically what the regulations are saying is that any stormwater that's created as a result of the project needs to be contained and filtered on the project before it goes anyplace else.
So why that's important, so subdivision gets filed or site plan, but more often, so we have a stormwater consultant. And before they can start the project, they have to fill out an NOI, which is a notice of intent with the DEC. The building department, we have construction meetings, we have to make sure they have a certain mailbox, there's all different things. And then that team has to pay somebody to come and do a SWIP inspection every week, and then our person does it. And this makes sure that all the regulations are being met. And we have to look at how ours comes in. Is it satisfactory? Is it marginal? You know, are they failing? Do we need to put a stop work order on? You know, we're looking at silt fencing as the basic, but then it goes up to the list. And then when a project is complete, they have to make sure that they've completed everything, and then they'll file what's called an NOT, which is a notice of determination. And we will not issue COs on a site plan. On a subdivision, the houses are getting sold, but before we'll take the road over or the stormwater basins, you need to have the NOT filed, and then make sure there's bonds for the roads, and then they have to put maintenance bond, and until our engineer and everyone on our team feels that the road is satisfactory, our highway superintendent is important to make sure he's satisfied, if it's a town road, and then the pond area, the stormwater consultant will make sure that it's to his satisfaction as well as our engineer. And that's how a project on the backside of it gets completed. So,
Simple.
questions? No. All right, so just to close.
One last question, yeah,
Go
I'm sorry.
ahead.
So I haven't even looked at the MS4 regulations yet. I've been reading codes all week. And so besides this, is there any other things in that whole that we really should look at and know, or is it really just stormwater management and that's it? Is there any other part of that?
Of MS4, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you,
That you think we're going to?
So there's two permits. One, the MS4 permit, MS4 stands for Municipal Separate Stormwater System. So there's 4 S's. I may have missed one, but anyway. So it's distinguished between what's called a combined stormwater system. In the old days, you had sewer systems, sanitary sewer systems, and stormwater systems together. Where, you know, in New York City, Yonkers, they're actually still permitted to have combined stormwater flows, but back in the 1970s, the Federal Clean Water Act basically made that illegal, and that any stormwater could not be mixed with a sewer discharge. Because the Clean Water Act required that sewers be treated at a sewer treatment plant. Stormwater is not required to be treated at a sewer treatment plant. So because of that, they need to be separated. And that's the S, one of the S's in MS4. As a part of that, the MS4 system for municipality includes your catch basins in your highways, and other drainage facilities. It would include your parking lots at any of your town facilities, anything, you know, roof leaders off your buildings. And for the MS4 permit itself, that governs the town of Wappinger. And the MS4 permit has certain, in addition to requirements for maintaining that, there's education requirements that we have to, you know, inform the public as to, you know, if you ever see, like, sometimes you'll see painted near a catch basin a fish, and it says drains to the Hudson River. That's actually part of the MS4 requirements, and that's an education. You get points, right? You have to have a certain number of points. And then you have to do inspections of your facilities, and you have to come up with mitigation things. That's part of the MS4 permit for the municipality. So the town of Wappinger has an MS4 permit. Village of Wappinger Falls has an MS4 permit. Even the school district has an MS4. So the school district's actually governed by it, you know, the county. So there's that. There's a separate permit which is called the general permit for construction discharges. And so that's what the NOT and the NOI is for. So if you're going to do any kind of construction, and if it's, you know, meets the threshold, so if it's the lower threshold, you have to provide erosion and sediment control provisions during construction, so that's silt fencing. You know, I grew up in a neighborhood where, there was construction, and if you recall, like, back in the 60s and the 70s, right, you'd see mud all over the roads from the truck tires, coming out of a construction site. Well, under the MS4 and SWIP under the construction permit and requirements, you have to put, track pads so that the mud from the construction site doesn't get tracked onto a road. You got wash down facility, right? So all of those things, and that's part of the erosion and sediment control provisions. So those provisions are, during construction. And then, part of that requirement is if you exceed certain thresholds, then the provisions that you put in place during construction have to continue after construction. So that's kind of the distinction there.
More questions?
Thank you.
Okay, so just very quickly to wrap up, when you get your agendas, if you look after something is on the project, B keeps track of, you'll see PH, public hearing, open, closed, lead agency, and the date it was sent. So sometimes when you're at the meeting, you don't remember everything, at least we look, and it's like quick notes, we know that we've done lead agency, we know we've opened and closed it. So on your agendas, there's a lot of information. Just some housekeeping, if you're not going to make it for whatever reason, I know most people let Bruce know, but if you have a moment, if you could just text me or B, because if there's more than I have to make sure there's a quorum. By code and by law, you have to attend 80%, that's your attendance. And the nice thing is you have to do 4 hours of training, and you've already just done 3. So if you go May 30th.
Actually, it's like 1 minute past 9, so that would be the 4th hour.
Round up that, yeah.
That's it.
So, and one of the things, just to follow up, just one other point. So Barbara mentioned the quorum issue. So in order to have a quorum, you need 4 members of the board to be present. So you have to have, to take any action, and any votes by the board have to be 4 members. So if you've got 4 members present for a meeting, in order to grant an approval, all 4 members have to vote. So it's not a majority of the members present. It is, the decision of the board has to be a majority of the board, and that's even if there's vacancies. So if for some reason, right, there's a vacancy in the position, there's only 6 members on the board, still it's 4. It's not. So 4 is always a requirement. And one of the other things is with respect to ethics requirements, with respect to, so if you've got an interest, financial interest in an application that comes before you, you've got a legal obligation to recuse yourself. As a general rule, you'll probably know it. So if you've got, if you're going to bring in a subdivision application for your project, you would have to recuse yourself. I mean, one of the things that's interesting is, as a planning board member, you can't send the subdivision application to the town of Fishkill, right? It comes before this board, so. But if any of the members have, an interest, a financial interest in the application, then you've got an obligation to recuse yourself. And, you would note, and you note that for the record. So you want to make sure that you note that for the record. And if you've got a financial interest, if you've got a conflict that you can't sit on the matter, I always advise, for the member to get off the board, get off the dais, sit in the audience or sit outside. That way, you're not viewed as having any influence in the application. But having said that,
Going forward, if you have any questions in between the meetings, you can always reach out to me or to the consultant that would best be able to answer it, whether it's an engineering question. But we're always available by email, phone, and thank you so much for sitting here.
It was a great session. Thank you.
Got a little bit of homework to do tonight.
Feel free to reach out with any questions.
Yeah, so anyway, so with that, we'll entertain a motion to close the workshop
So
meeting
moved.
this evening. Motion's made, seconded, all in favor? Aye.